Hey guys, tonight we're ditching the comfort zone and plunging headfirst into something considerably darker. Forget the sanitized storybooks and the heroic Hollywood epics. We're about to explore the raw, unvarnished reality of what life was truly like during the Middle Ages. A brutal age of unforgiving plagues, arbitrary punishments, and, yes, a whole lot of pottage. If you think you're tough, trust me, the truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you strap in for this unglamorous journey, take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely appreciate the unvarnished truths I bring to light here. And seriously, drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see just how many of us are willing to confront the past from every corner of the globe. Now, go ahead and dim those lights. Maybe even click on a fan for that soft, almost meditative background hum. Let's take a deep breath and collectively ease into tonight's rather uncomfortable journey together. Congratulations, you've just blinked awake. Not in your cozy bed, but in the year 1325. The immediate good news, you're alive. The infinitely worse news, so are all the fleas currently making a home on you. Your bed is less a piece of furniture and more a crude, half-rotted straw mattress. It's teeming with unseen crawling things and stuffed with hay that still unmistakably reeks of a barn floor. Because let's be honest, 3 months ago, it was a barn floor. There's no memory foam cradling your aching body, certainly no fluffy pillows, and the very concept of Egyptian cotton sheets would be as alien as a spaceship. Instead, you're covered by a single, rough wool blanket. It hasn't been washed since last winter, if ever, and now, from the accumulated grime, sweat, and various unidentifiable stains, it weighs roughly as much as a small, exhausted cow. You try to focus through the lingering haze of sleep, but the world immediately asserts itself. The church bell, somewhere in the cold distance, clangs with an iron-tongued ferocity. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only infinitely louder, more insistent, and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a single-room wooden hut with thick, mud-chinked walls, no proper windows, just narrow slits covered by animal hide or dense cloth. It boasts a charmingly open-concept floor plan where your entire extended family, a few of your most resilient livestock, and a thriving ecosystem of domestic insects all share the exact same intimate space. The air itself is a fragrant symphony, a subtle, layered blend of stale, low-alcohol beer, the earthy tang of human sweat, the unmistakable musky scent of a goat or two, and something you desperately pray isn't mold, but deep down in your soul, you know it absolutely is. Scented candles haven't even been dreamed of, and frankly, even if they had, they'd just melt into the perpetually damp, uneven dirt floor. You attempt to stretch, a primal urge for release, but immediately regret it. The air inside the hut is freezing, biting at your exposed skin, and every single one of your joints protests with a sharp, familiar ache. You're only 22 years old, but in medieval terms, you're already roughly middle-aged, your body worn down by relentless labor and privation. Your spine creaks and groans like an old, ill-maintained wooden door, and your knees sound uncannily like a bag of rocks being violently shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of this miserable bed is less a morning routine and more a perilous gamble. The floor is either wet and slick from last night's rain, which inevitably leaked through the poorly thatched roof, or it's crusty and sticky from something your neighbor's chicken, or worse, your own, decided to deposit there. Either way, your bare feet are now, regrettably, an integral part of the local ecosystem. And privacy? What, pray tell, is that? The concept doesn't exist. Your entire family, father, mother, siblings, perhaps even a random cousin who just never quite left, are all stirring awake right beside you. There are no bedrooms, no flimsy curtains, no me time here. It's just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you are truly never, ever alone. Because parasites, rodents, and at least 8 other people are always, perpetually with you. And this, my friend, is merely how your day starts. Trust me, it only gets worse from here. So, you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors, a minor victory in itself. Congratulations. Now, nature calls. And it's not calling politely with a gentle chime. It's screaming at the top of its lungs. This is precisely the moment you'll begin to truly, profoundly miss your modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no comforting porcelain seat, no soft toilet paper, no magical flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger tucked away in a corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a peculiar social experiment, and more often than not, a small public event. If you're a peasant like most, your bathroom is likely a rickety wooden bucket, often just behind the house, which is already overflowing because Uncle Wolfstan had a particularly rough night after eating those questionable turnips. The stench is nothing short of biblical. You hold your breath, perform your necessary business as quickly as possible, and then, here's the true kicker. You simply toss the contents into the street. Yes, the street. The etiquette dictates you're supposed to shout something like, "Gardez-vous," Old French for, "watch out below," before unceremoniously dumping it out your window. Although, frankly, no one ever seems to move fast enough. The streets in medieval towns aren't paved. They are open sewers, charming rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you absolutely, definitively would rather not examine too closely. If you're lucky enough to inhabit a town blessed with public latrines, congratulations. You get the distinct privilege of sitting shoulder to shoulder with perfect strangers in an outhouse, where the very concept of privacy is a cruel myth, and ventilation is an even crueler joke. You might attempt some small talk, but for the love of all that is holy, try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people make do with whatever's at hand. Straw, large leaves, worn rags, clumps of moss, or, if they're feeling particularly indulgent and wealthy, a small scrap of wool. Sometimes, quite often in fact, nothing at all, which, coincidentally, might go a long way in explaining why handshakes weren't exactly a popular greeting just yet. And if you're a noble residing in a grand castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, essentially a hole in the wall that conveniently drops your waist directly into the moat below. A brilliant idea, except that your enemies are well aware of this architectural feature. And yes, attackers sometimes use to climb in through the waist chute. Talk about entering through the back door. So, whether you're a humble farmer or a powerful baron, medieval toileting is consistently a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's undeniably dangerous, and it is never not utterly disgusting. One wrong slip on a wet, slick stone path, and you're quite literally face first in humanity's collective leftovers. And you still haven't brushed your teeth. But don't worry, we'll get to that festering problem next. You've survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, don't you? Perhaps a nice breakfast. Something warm, utterly delicious, and comforting. Sorry, my friend, this is medieval Europe. The word comforting has no place here. Breakfast, if you can even dignify it with that name, is a grim, utilitarian affair. There are no delicate eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering to life with aromatic promise, and certainly no artisanal avocado toast. You sit down, or more likely, squat, near the smoldering embers of the hearth, presented with a wooden bowl containing something that looks suspiciously like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew, a viscous concoction made from whatever meager ingredients could be salvaged. Grains, like oats or barley, hearty root vegetables, perhaps a few beans if luck truly smiled upon you. It has been simmering in the same iron pot for days, sometimes even weeks, with new ingredients simply dumped on top of the old, forming an ever-evolving, vaguely edible experiment. On the side, you receive a hunk of bread so incredibly hard and dense it could realistically deflect arrows. It's typically made from coarse rye or barley flour, often notoriously bulked up with sawdust, ground-up acorns, or other creatively questionable ingredients, because pure wheat is strictly a rich man's extravagant fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it. You wrestle with it. You negotiate its surrender. And for drinks, you're certainly not sipping orange juice or a frothy oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the local water sources are teeming with parasites, visible filth, and the microscopic armies of medieval disease. So, you start your day with a weak ale, low in alcohol, high in survivability. Even the children drink it. No one is happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Craving some succulent meat or rich cheese? Dream on. Those are reserved for Sundays and specific saints' feast days, and only then if your Lord happens to be feeling particularly generous. Most peasants are lucky to eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, it's a rare treat, available only when in season, and not already fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices unless you belong to the royalty. A single pinch of pepper can easily cost more than your entire monthly wages. Salt is so valuable, it's often kept under lock and key. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp down your medieval beer, and valiantly try not to dwell on the distinct possibility that a rat might have nibbled your pottage in the night. Breakfast here doesn't energize you, it merely happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it. Because, without question, it absolutely does. So, you've choked down your sad, uninspiring medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it will provide much comfort or relief. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. Just one. It's a rough wool tunic or a scratchy linen shift that you've worn every single day for months, possibly even years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion, no changing for the occasion. There's just wearing this single garment until it literally disintegrates on your body, or, more likely, gives you a persistent fungal infection. Underwear is entirely optional. If you're among the exceedingly fortunate, you might possess a simple linen undertunic. If not, well, you're going commando beneath layers of perpetually scratchy, sweat-soaked wool. all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no real concept of what a proper seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no fragrant bar of soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner within 1,000 leagues. Consequently, your clothes are permanently stained, stiff with dried bodily fluids and dirt, and scented like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty for a decade. Even if you were inclined to wash them, it's not a simple task. You'd have to haul water from a distant river or a communal well, painstakingly heat it over a precious fire, scrub your tunic on a washboard with harsh ashes or lye, a caustic solution, and then hope for it to dry in the sun, which, in these parts, seems to be out approximately 3 days a year. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you even possess any, they're crudely made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer about as much arch support as a discarded banana peel. Most peasants simply go barefoot through thick mud, through animal dung, and through the ever-present medieval landmines, jagged, sharp rocks, and putrid puddles of disease. All of this culminates in one undeniable truth. Your skin absolutely hates you. You itch perpetually, incessantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body, a thriving metropolis of tiny, biting inhabitants. Everyone has them. Haughty nobles, lousy monks, it's in the name, and undeniably itchy children. You are, quite simply, a walking insect farm. You'll find yourself scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one, not a single soul, will bat an eye. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing, your scalp a literal battlefield of bites and scabs. And if you develop a particularly nasty rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no soothing hydrocortisone cream, no one to gently inform you it's probably scabies. You just stoically continue to suffer. And if by some miracle you avoid a secondary infection, great. That persistent rash will merely accompany you for the next 6 months, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you're thoroughly dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to an early grave. Now that you're fully dressed in a symphony of itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, mind you, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no invigorating toothpaste, no mouthwash, and certainly no dental floss. The very concept of oral hygiene is about as popular and widespread as bathing, which is to say, not very at all. Some individuals might chew on a twig or rinse their mouths with a bit of wine or vinegar. But for the most part, your teeth are entirely on their own, and they are, in no uncertain terms, not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something grimly pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, a landscape of decay. Gums are perpetually swollen and often bleeding. And those aren't just mere food stains on your teeth. That's active, relentless decay. You likely have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet ubiquitous, is becoming increasingly common among the rich, imported at great cost, and mostly used in small, status symbol cakes, or to conspicuously show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations! You get to rot your teeth even faster than the peasants, with an accelerated, sugary decline. If you're poor, you'll achieve the same effect, albeit more slowly, through years of grinding gritty porridge, fermented bread, and ceaseless, arduous chewing. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, a constant, nagging presence in the background, a kind of pain that makes you seriously consider praying for divine intervention, drinking yourself into oblivion, or, most terrifyingly, pulling the offending tooth out yourself with a pair of blacksmith's pliers. And that, my friend, is not a joke. That was often the actual, standard treatment. Professional dentists didn't truly exist, but barber surgeons certainly did. Yes, the very same individual who haphazardly cuts your hair is also the one enthusiastically pulling out your molars by flickering candlelight, using an iron hook and precisely zero anesthesia. Have an infected tooth? Hope you like fevers, because without the miracle of antibiotics, that infection can very easily turn into sepsis, sending you straight to your grave from what would today be a routine trip to the dentist. That's right, the same minor ailment that sends us to a pharmacy today could easily be your funeral in the 1300s. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis, or truly terrible breath, is simply everywhere. If you're single and looking for a spouse, you're definitely not judged by the brilliance of your smile. You're judged by the size of your land and the robust health of your livestock. In short, your mouth is a perpetually losing battlefield. Now that your teeth are throbbing with a dull ache, let's head outside, because your real job, the one that will irrevocably break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there's no brightly lit office, no comfortable desk, no refreshing coffee break, and absolutely zero chance of promotion or upward mobility. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is brutally simple. Don't die while laboring tirelessly for someone else's comfort. Congratulations, you are a peasant. That means you are bound to work the land that rightfully belongs to a powerful lord, who probably doesn't even remember your name, let alone care about your existence. You rise with the first sliver of dawn, and stop only when the sun completely disappears behind the distant trees. Your tools are rudimentary and cruel. A rough wooden hoe, a rusty, chipped sickle, and whatever bones are still miraculously intact within your weary body. There is no concept of a weekend, no clocking out for a well-deserved rest. There's only the endless cycle of sunrise to sunset, 6 arduous days a week. Sunday is technically off, but only if you're not frantically harvesting a critical crop, fighting off a band of opportunistic raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black and threatening to spread its rot. The work itself is brutally physical. Fields are plowed by hand, one furrow at a time, or, if your lord is wealthy enough to provide one, by a single, overworked ox. You dig ditches until your hands are raw, meticulously sow seeds by scattering them, painstakingly pull weeds that seem to grow back instantly, and carry heavy buckets of water until your spine begins to permanently resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're exhausted to your core. No one is asking how your mental health is faring. If you happen to be a woman, surprise! You don't just endure the back-breaking fieldwork. You also tirelessly care for a brood of children, clean the perpetually dirty hovel, cook whatever meager provisions are available, spin wool into thread, feed the animals, and discreetly pretend your husband's rampant lice infestation isn't slowly but surely migrating to your side of the communal bed. Children, bless their tiny calloused hands, start helping out around the tender age of 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a distant dream of one day not dying of the flu. And if you're one of the rare few who isn't a farmer, perhaps you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Great. You still labor with searing fire, noxious chemicals, or pungent animal guts all day long in poorly ventilated, dimly lit sheds. The pay? Basically just enough to survive. The perks? Occasional bleeding, chronic pain, and a pervasive sense of dread. Break a bone? Too bad. Get a fever? Drink some lukewarm beer and keep going. You absolutely cannot afford to stop, not even for a single day, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a rather direct solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel tighter, ignore the blisters blossoming on your hands, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test against certain oblivion. Now that your back is on fire from a morning of relentless labor in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about predictable seasons and more about an ongoing, capricious punishment from the sky. Let's begin with winter. There's no insulation to speak of, no concept of central heating, and certainly no weatherproofing. Just crude wooden walls with gaps wide enough to casually throw a chicken through. Your windows are covered with animal hide or thick matted cloth, not precious glass. The fire in the hearth. A lovely idea in theory, but you simply don't possess enough firewood to keep it burning steadily, because wood is both incredibly expensive and gathering it from the Lord's forest is often strictly illegal. Yes, you could actually be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong patch of woods. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle desperately near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose painfully frozen, your feet permanently cold and often damp, and your fingers so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't a medical diagnosis. It's just grimly called bad luck. Now, fast forward to summer. Sounds like a blissful reprieve, right? Wrong. In summer, your uninsulated home transforms into a stifling clay oven. There's no fan to stir the air, no cooling cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant to mask the inevitable. You sweat profusely through your precious layers, but you can't remove them, as showing too much skin is both scandalous and invites a host of other problems: severe sunburn, relentless insect bites, and harsh social judgment. The flies are out in full buzzing force, relentlessly attracted to your unwashed body and the lingering smell of last week's goat stew still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz maddeningly by your ear while you attempt to sleep, assuming you can even drift off through the cacophony of your neighbors yelling and babies endlessly crying. Out in the fields, the relentless sun bakes you mercilessly. No sunblock, no wide-brimmed hat unless you've crudely fashioned one out of straw, like some desperate, sweating scarecrow. And the worst part? You still have to work, ceaselessly. Heat stroke isn't recognized. It's just called taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering uncontrollably in your own hovel, desperately wondering if your toes will survive until spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never, ever changes, no matter the season, is that your clothes still itch, your meager food is still terrible, and your next back-breaking job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Perhaps you just want to splash a little cool water on your face to wake up from this damp, feverish dream of a life. Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. In fact, it's quietly, patiently trying to murder you. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream might look pristine, bubbling merrily and crystal clear, like something plucked straight from a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it absolutely is not. Just upstream, someone almost certainly just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it further up the bank. Parasites, virulent bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe await eagerly in every single sip. That's precisely why most people drank beer. Yes, beer. Even the children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that this was small beer. Incredibly weak in alcohol, but profoundly strong in survival value. The brewing process boiled the water, making it significantly safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option, of course, if you were rich enough to afford it and entirely unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for basic cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people genuinely believed that bathing actually opened your pores and allowed disease to seep into your body. That's right. Washing yourself was considered a medically risky endeavor. You were, apparently, cleaner and safer if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained unsavory reputations as dens for gossip, scandalous behavior, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurricular activities. So, naturally, the church got involved and, with righteous indignation, shut many of them down. Even if you did desperately want to bathe, it was a full, arduous production. You'd need to fetch gallons of water from the distant well, boil it painstakingly over a roaring fire, fill a crude wooden tub that perpetually leaked, and then pray no one else in the household used it before you, or worse, after you. And rainwater? Collected in open barrels, where birds habitually poop, insects breed with abandon, and moss thrives. Sounds incredibly refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going into your mouth, onto your body, or even onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less a life source and more a high-stakes gamble. One wrong gulp, and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating every single one of your life choices. Next time you sip crystal clear tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They truly didn't have the luxury of hydration without profound hazard. So, you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a particularly jagged rock shaped like disappointment. Or perhaps an infected splinter festered. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is less a science and more a form of polite torture, administered with a theological degree. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a persistent cough, a spreading rash, a painfully broken bone, or the creeping tendrils of the dreaded plague, is attributed to your humors being out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health, your very vitality, depends on keeping them perfectly balanced, like some sort of internal precarious soup. Got a fever? Clearly too much blood. The prescribed answer? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your precious life force into a bowl using a dull, rusty blade. Or, if you're particularly lucky, a hungry leech. And yes, barbers, the same individuals who roughly cut hair, were often the ones performing these delicate procedures. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling sad, anxious, or perpetually melancholy? That's clearly an excess of black bile.
The cure?
Potent laxatives, perhaps a warm herbal purge to violently expel the perceived imbalance, or simply prayers and a cold compress while everyone around you pointedly avoids eye contact and discreetly starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or sustain a nasty wound, you are in truly dire trouble. There is no anesthesia, unless you count the blessed oblivion of passing out from sheer, unbearable pain. Surgery, when performed, is done with knives that haven't been properly cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are often heated over an open fire, not for any sterile purpose, but because, let's be honest, they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics are centuries away, a distant dream. Germ theory hasn't even been conceived. Instead, they believe disease originates from bad air, miasma, or, more commonly, from God being profoundly annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomachache? It must have been your sinful thoughts from last night.
Hope you enjoy confessing your sins while simultaneously vomiting your guts out.
If your condition unfortunately worsens, you'll be subjected to even more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles administered as a poultice, and a priest will soon be at your bedside, hastily giving you last rites, just in case. At this point, they're not really preparing for a cure. They're preparing for the inevitable cure known as death. And if, by some utterly baffling miracle, you do recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on your miserable soul. The doctor will, of course, take full credit, and the leech, having performed its dutiful service, will probably get promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about simply surviving the cure. After a long, torturous day of back-breaking labor, constant lice, and, if you were lucky, blood-sucking leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling with a deep, desperate hunger, ready for what should be the one remaining joy in your wretched life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. The very concept of effective food preservation doesn't truly exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the desperate hope that the bitter winter air will somehow keep things marginally fresh. Your meat, if you're incredibly lucky enough to have any at all, has been hanging for days, openly exposed to flies, marinated in questionable, probably rancid brine, and very likely shared with a rat or two. Bread is, without question, the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In years of particularly bad harvests, desperate peasants would bulk it up with sawdust, wood bark, or even clay to make it stretch further and quell the gnawing hunger. And if it's rye harvest season, there's an added, terrifying bonus. Ergot, a sinister fungus that causes convulsions, terrifying hallucinations, and often a slow, agonizing death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season, everywhere, year-round? Turnips. So many bland, mealy turnips. Boiled, mashed, or perhaps swimming in a murky, thick pottage. A culinary abomination which, if you recall from Chapter 3, was essentially a bubbling hot swamp of indeterminate ingredients, often kept simmering for days, even weeks, since your great-grandfather's funeral. A perpetual stew, designed for survival, not enjoyment, its taste a constant reminder of desperation. Fresh fruit might briefly bless the table in the fleeting days of autumn, but without any means of preservation, its juicy bounty quickly surrendered to rot. And sugar? That precious, granulated luxury was a myth for most, an exorbitant indulgence hoarded by the opulent elite to flaunt their status, often evidenced by their fashionably blackened teeth, a sign of wealth, not dental hygiene. Dairy, too, was a gamble with the reaper. Unpasteurized milk, warm from the cow, spoiled in mere hours, a breeding ground for invisible terrors. Butter and cheese, aged and churned, fared slightly better, yet they remained potent vectors of bacteria and disease. But people consumed them nonetheless, because, frankly, the alternative was often gnawing on your own hardened boot leather, a grim choice between probable illness and absolute starvation. And let's not even begin to discuss seasoning. Spices like the fiery kick of pepper, the aromatic warmth of cinnamon, or the fragrant dust of nutmeg were more precious than glittering gold, traded in morsels and guarded with lives. For the average peasant, flavor was a rare, distant memory, coaxed only from the sharp bite of onions, a precious pinch of salt if fortune smiled, and the ever-present flavor of pain, the gnawing ache of hunger, the persistent internal discomfort from a diet devoid of nutrients. Most meals, if we're being honest, tasted like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness, a constant reminder of life's bitter monotony. But food wasn't merely a health hazard, it was a potent political one, a cornerstone of feudal oppression. Every deer that bounded through the forest, every plump pheasant that strutted in the brush, every wriggling rabbit that burrowed beneath the earth, these were the exclusive property of the lord of the manor, not yours. Caught poaching a scrawny rabbit, a meager offering to stave off your family's hunger, and you could face severe fines that would cripple your family for generations. Harsh imprisonment in a dank, rat-infested cell, or even a swift, brutal execution. That's right. The pursuit of your dinner could literally get you hanged, a chilling reminder of who truly held power over life and death. So, as you slumped down to eat your monotonous gray stew by the flickering, smoky light of a dying fire, remember that every single bite was not just sustenance, but a risk, a silent act of defiance against a system designed to keep you subservient. Yet, you ate anyway, because in the unforgiving Middle Ages, food didn't simply nourish, it tested you relentlessly, day after day. It's evening now. The sun has dipped below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across your meager hovel. You've worked until your muscles screamed, suffered countless indignities, and barely managed to digest that suspicious stew, its unidentifiable contents swirling ominously in your gut. You might foolishly believe the day is finally winding down, that a moment of respite is within reach. But don't dare relax, for the omnipresent gaze of God is fixed upon you. So too is the stern eye of the village priest, and, perhaps most terrifyingly, the beady gaze of your neighbor, Agnes, who will absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, gleefully rat you out if you dare miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just a part of life, it is life itself, a relentless, all-encompassing force. The Church, a colossal spiritual landlord, dictated the very rhythm of your existence, your calendar, your laws, your limited education, if you were among the rare few who could decipher a single letter, your birth, your marriage, your death, and every single insignificant moment in between. You were, metaphorically, a tenant constantly behind on your rent, forever indebted to its divine authority. Every day was meticulously structured around the mournful, resonant peals of prayer bells. The massive bell in the town church tower rang out at dawn, at noon, and again as dusk fell. These weren't merely gentle reminders. They were absolute commands. Because missing prayer, even a single one, was a grave sin. Forget to bow your head in solemn deference as the priest passed? Sin. Dare to eat a sliver of meat on a Friday, when penance was required? Sin. Allow your mind to wander to your neighbor's wife in that one particularly vivid dream? A double sin, punishable by even harsher penance. And yes, hell, a concept preached with terrifying enthusiasm, was vividly, breathtakingly real. Priests, with dramatic flair and meticulous detail, painted a horrifying canvas of eternal damnation. Rivers of scorching fire that flowed with molten pain, vast lakes of perpetually boiling blood, grotesque demons with wicked pitchforks, and an eternity of agonizing wailing and gnashing of teeth. If the grim reality of the plague wasn't enough to curdle your blood, the promise of eternal damnation certainly would. You couldn't even attempt to read the Bible yourself, for it was meticulously guarded behind the impenetrable barrier of Latin, a sacred language reserved exclusively for the cloistered monks, the exalted clergy, and perhaps that one insufferably arrogant noble kid who believed he was too good for the common dirt. You relied entirely on the church, on the priest's interpretation, to filter and dictate every word of divine truth. That meant, if the priest, standing in his pulpit, declared your devastating crop failure was a direct consequence of your insufficient prayer, then, by God, it was time to kneel harder, to humble yourself even further. Tithes, a mandatory tenth of absolutely everything you owned or produced, were extracted with ruthless efficiency. If you painstakingly grew a field of golden wheat, you surrendered a tenth of its bounty. If you diligently raised a flock of chickens, you handed over a tenth of their precious eggs. If you had nothing, if you were destitute and penniless, then congratulations. You were spiritually bankrupt, forever branded a sinner, and financially doomed to an even deeper misery. Holidays, or holy days, as they were truly known, were numerous, dozens of them dotting the calendar. And while they did offer a brief, much-needed respite from the brutal, back-breaking labor, they were emphatically not for enjoyment or merriment. Instead, they were solemn obligations, mandatory attendance at lengthy Mass, rigorous fasting that amplified your gnawing hunger, public confession of sins to absolve your guilt, and a constant, internal reminder that joy, any fleeting moment of pleasure, was a dangerous, sinful indulgence. Questioning the Church, even silently in your heart, was an act of profound peril. Heretics, those who dared to defy dogma, were brutally burned at the stake. Accused witches, often just independent women with herbal knowledge, were cruelly drowned. Blasphemers, who spoke ill of God or the saints, were savagely flogged, their backs shredded. And skeptics, those who harbored doubts, were swiftly and often violently reformed back into line. So, you went through the motions. You chanted the familiar prayers. You bowed your head until your neck ached, and you prayed, fervently, that your weary soul, after enduring this dirt-covered, wretched life, might finally find its way to paradise, assuming, of course, the priest in charge took a liking to you. Because in the Middle Ages, God might indeed be merciful, but the Church, his earthly representative, not so much. If you thought navigating the existence of a medieval peasant was unbelievably rough, try doing it as a woman. Imagine enduring all the ubiquitous filth, the relentless famine, and the ever-present fear, but then heap upon that the added burdens of excruciating childbirth, mandated subservience, and crushing social invisibility.
In the Middle Ages, being a woman was akin to playing a video game on the hardest possible mode, with no health potions to restore your strength, no save points to offer a reprieve, and absolutely no restart button to escape a catastrophic failure. From the very moment of her birth, a girl's life path was tragically, irreversibly locked in. Marry young, bear as many children as her body could withstand, serve her husband's every whim, and die tired, worn out, and utterly spent. Education? Not a chance. Unless you were born into a privileged noble family and sent away to the relative sanctuary of a convent, your intellectual development would, quite literally, cease around the time you mastered the arduous art of churning butter and patching a worn tunic. Marriage came early. Alarmingly, disturbingly early. It was not considered unusual or scandalous to be betrothed at the tender age of 12 and to be pregnant with your first child by 14. This wasn't a union born of love or affection. It was a cold, calculated transaction about land, about livestock, about forging strategic alliances between families. Your opinion, your feelings, your desires? Not required, not even considered. Once married, you were, by legal and social decree, essentially your husband's property, little more than a chattel. Your primary, inescapable duties were to produce heirs, preferably healthy male ones, to feed every mouth under his roof, to keep the household running smoothly, and, most crucially, never, ever to complain. Because complaining, daring to voice dissatisfaction, could quickly get you branded as a nag, or far, far worse, a witch. And that terrifying label came with a complimentary, swift drowning, or a horrific burning at the stake, depending solely on the local fashion for dispatching accused sorceresses. Childbirth itself was a horrifying death lottery. There was no concept of prenatal care, no sterile tools to prevent infection, no anesthesia to dull the unimaginable agony. Midwives, with their limited knowledge and crude instruments, did their absolute best, but even minor complications could swiftly mean death for the mother, for the child, or, with grim frequency, for both. Some incredibly resilient women survived 10 or even more pregnancies, their bodies scarred and ravaged. Many, far too many, did not survive even one. But don't you dare think for a moment that once the baby was finally out, your work lessened. Oh no. Now you had a screaming, demanding infant tucked into a lice-ridden hut, and you were still expected to nurse, to cook, to clean, and to continue helping in the unforgiving fields. You didn't get a break. You were the break, the unpaid, indispensable labor force for everyone else. If you remained unmarried, you were immediately viewed with suspicion, an anomaly outside the prescribed social order. If you were widowed, you were suddenly vulnerable, an easy target for exploitation or malice. If you dared to be outspoken, to possess a strong voice or independent thought, you were branded dangerous. Women who didn't conform, who deviated even slightly from the narrow path of expected behavior, were frequently accused of witchcraft, especially if they possessed any knowledge of herbal remedies, exhibited a noticeably strong personality, or simply had the misfortune of looking at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even within the confines of the church, your role was severely limited. Nuns, though devout, lived under unimaginably strict rules. No speaking without explicit permission, no freedom of movement beyond the cloister, and their spiritual worth was almost always implicitly, explicitly ranked below that of men. In short, if you were a woman in the Middle Ages, you were expected to endure, to obey, to reproduce, and to suffer in absolute silence, ideally while maintaining a placid, even smiling countenance. Because even in a time of universal, overwhelming suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer with an unnatural grace. So far, you've heroically battled the pervasive filth, the constant threat of starvation, the grinding weight of social injustice, and quite possibly even a particularly aggressive goat. But just when you think your wretched day can't possibly get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, brutal, bloody, and, by the chilling standards of medieval society, often completely acceptable. Let's be absolutely clear. The Middle Ages were not a peaceful, idyllic era of chivalry. The very idea of law and order mostly meant desperately hoping your local lord wasn't in a particularly foul mood. Violence was a ubiquitous, ever-present specter, woven into the very fabric of daily life. It flared within the supposedly safe confines of the home, erupted savagely in the muddy streets, raged on the blood-soaked battlefield, festered in petty church disputes, and sometimes, incredibly, even broke out in line at the communal bread oven over a stale loaf. Crime was commonplace, punishment was savagely brutal, and justice was far more a theatrical performance, a terrifying spectacle of power, than any genuine protection for the innocent. Steal a single loaf of bread to feed your starving children, and you could very well lose a hand to a rusty axe. Accused of lying, even innocently, your tongue might be pierced with a red-hot iron. Gossip too much, daring to speak ill of your betters, you might find yourself acquainted with the scold's bridle, a horrifying metal mask forcibly strapped to your head with a sharp bar inserted directly into your mouth. For correction, of course. A public humiliation designed to silence you permanently. And let's say you were accused of something truly serious, heresy against the church, a major theft, or the terrifying charge of witchcraft. How, you might ask, would you prove your innocence in such a grave matter? Why, by being brutally tortured, of course. Welcome to the infamous trial by ordeal. In one version, you were compelled to plunge your bare hand into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a stone from the bottom. If the wound miraculously healed without infection within 3 excruciating days, you were declared innocent. If not, you were unequivocally guilty, doomed to face the full wrath of medieval justice. Another equally horrifying option involved being tossed, bound hand and foot, into a frigid river. If you sank immediately, you were deemed innocent, and probably dead from drowning. If, by some cruel twist of fate, you floated, you were declared guilty and would be summarily punished anyway. It was like a medieval game show where the grand prize was merely survival, and the host was actively, gleefully rooting against you. And if you were condemned to death, that was not a quiet, private affair. No, an execution was a major public event, a macabre festival. Executions were performed in front of roaring, cheering crowds, eagerly anticipating the grim spectacle. Hangings, beheadings, burnings at the stake, these were the main attractions, a brutal form of popular entertainment. Sometimes people would even bring snacks, making it the medieval equivalent of settling in for a particularly gruesome episode of cable television. Domestic violence was completely normal, tragically accepted. Husbands were not only allowed, but often explicitly expected to discipline their wives and children with physical force.
Street fights were commonplace, erupting over the slightest provocation. You could be savagely beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war? War was always simmering, a constant threat on the horizon. Local feuds between rival lords, territorial disputes over a few barren acres, grand religious crusades to distant lands. Someone was always marching off to stab someone else, usually in the name of honor or God, or perhaps just sheer, unadulterated boredom. Violence wasn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It was society, an inescapable part of its very fabric. Everyone lived with the constant, terrifying knowledge that life was agonizingly fragile, justice was utterly arbitrary, and your own neighbor might, without warning, bash your head in over a stray pig. So, you learned to walk carefully, to keep your eyes downcast, and to never, ever trust anyone who carried a club. At this point, you've somehow made it through the constant itching of lice, the leeches that latched onto your skin, the soul-crushing misery of a laundryless existence, and the looming, terrifying threat of public disembowelment. But now, my friend, comes the final, inevitable chapter of most medieval lives, an early and utterly unglamorous death. If you were somehow still alive and, miraculously, still breathing past the venerable age of 40, you were practically a celebrity, a living legend. You might even be respectfully referred to as the Old One, which was less of a quaint nickname and more of a statistical miracle in human form. Let's truly break it down. The average life expectancy in this grim era hovered around a mere 30 to 40 years, but even that bleak number was heavily skewed, dragged down by the devastating reality of infant mortality. Nearly half of all children tragically died before reaching the tender age of 5. Disease, rampant malnutrition, or simply one particularly brutal winter was all it took to snuff out a young life. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, no modern medicine, just desperate prayers and an almost total lack of hope. If you were fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, enough to survive childhood, you entered adulthood already utterly exhausted, your body prematurely aged. Work, grueling and relentless, began as soon as you could walk upright and carry a burden. By the time you reached 25, your joints creaked and groaned like an ancient monastery door swinging on rusty hinges. You might already be missing several teeth, perhaps a finger lost to a farming accident, and most of your original youthful optimism would have been thoroughly beaten out of you. Women, in particular, faced a uniquely deadly gauntlet: childbirth. It stood as one of the single leading causes of death for medieval women. A terrifying, often fatal rite of passage. There was no pain relief to soothe the unimaginable agony, no medical intervention to address complications, just desperate prayer, bowls of hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out, slowly, tragically, on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless and ever-present. Catastrophic farming accidents, infections from even minor wounds that festered unchecked, the sudden, brutal rage of a drunken neighbor, a crusade gone horribly sideways, or even simply walking to the market could be a perilous journey if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an overly zealous, angry tax collector. Death could also come quietly, insidiously, from the terrifying plague, which could transform bustling cities into vast, silent cemeteries overnight, or from famine, A slow, agonizing killer that could grip entire regions for seasons, thinning out entire villages until only ghosts remained. Or, with cruel randomness, from sheer bad luck, like unknowingly eating spoiled grain and spending your final, nightmarish hours hallucinating wildly and screaming at the mud walls of your hut. And funerals? You were lucky, truly lucky, if you even received one. Bodies were often buried with grim haste, often simply tossed into mass graves to prevent the spread of disease. There was no embalming, no polished wooden coffins, just a hastily dug hole, a few mumbled prayers from a weary priest, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was even enough consecrated space left in the crowded churchyard. So, yes, in medieval times, life was brutally short, painfully difficult, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual, indifferent forms. You didn't retire from life, you simply stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final, glorious chapter, where the medieval dream, that romanticized illusion, finally dies a deserved death. So, how's your day truly been? You've woken up in a pile of your own filth, relieved yourself into a communal bucket, valiantly tried to brush your teeth with wishful thinking and perhaps a twig, nearly passed out from the gnawing pangs of hunger, worked until your spine screamed for mercy, scratched incessantly at the itchy, louse-ridden wool of your tunic, prayed with every fiber of your being not to contract the plague, and somehow, by sheer dumb luck, barely dodged a public execution for the audacious crime of owning a squirrel. Welcome, my friend, to a single, utterly unremarkable day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a gallant knight, of shining armor and heroic deeds? Think again. That romanticized, sugar-coated version of the Middle Ages, the dashing swordsman, the noble ladies languishing in impossibly tall towers, the heroic, glorious battles, and the lavish feasts held in candlelit great halls. It's all a beautifully polished myth, crafted and perpetuated by fairy tales and fantastical books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, undeniably cruel, and profoundly, unforgivably unfair. Hierarchy was not just important, it was absolutely everything, an ironclad law of existence. If you were born poor, you remained poor, with little to no hope of escaping your wretched station. If you were born rich, well, congratulations, you had a significantly better chance of simply surviving. But even then, you were still only one bad pot of soup away from a raging case of dysentery and a hasty, unceremonious burial. Even the mighty nobles weren't immune to misery. Their grand castles were essentially drafty, perpetually cold stone refrigerators, teeming with fleas, choked with the acrid smoke of inefficient fires, and filled with the simmering tension of politically motivated, loveless marriages. Sure, you might possess a luxurious fur cloak and a goblet brimming with expensive wine, but you also faced a terrifying 50% chance of dying brutally in a petty skirmish, or succumbing to an infected splinter, a tiny injury that would be a mere inconvenience in the modern world. Not exactly the lap of luxury, was it? These simpler times were anything but simple. They were relentless, unforgiving, and exhausting. Everything took longer. Every task demanded immense effort. Everything hurt more, from the chronic aches in your overworked body to the emotional wounds of constant loss. Everything, from the agonizing process of childbirth to the simple act of chewing your tough, bland food, came with significant, often dire, consequences. Life was an unending struggle for survival, not a leisurely stroll.
And if you did, by some rare miracle, find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better for yourself or your children, there wasn't much you could actually do with that fleeting spark of hope. There was no upward mobility, no modern medicine to alleviate suffering, no internet to Google, "What's this weird rash on my arm?" You lived, you suffered, you worked your fingers to the bone, and you died, all within a narrow 10-mile radius of the exact spot where you were born. But here's perhaps the wildest, most profound part of it all. Through every single unimaginable hardship, the filth, the disease, the violence, the starvation, the injustice, people still laughed. They sang simple songs, told age-old stories around flickering fires, fell deeply, desperately in love, and somehow, against all odds, found profound meaning in their arduous existence. Not because life was easy, or good, or fair, but because humans, by their very nature, are stubbornly resilient creatures. Even in the darkest, most oppressive chapters of history, they somehow made space, however small, for light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean, comfortable bed, secure in a home with indoor plumbing, readily available antibiotics, and central heating, perhaps pause for a quiet moment. Say a silent thank you to the modern world, and to your countless ancestors who valiantly fought against rats, battled relentless famine, and endured the crushing weight of feudalism, all so that you, their descendant, would never have to. Long before she was immortalized as Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, a powerful mistress of sweeping reform, and a towering icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she entered the world as the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy, nestled within the vast region of Pomerania, offered little in the way of significant power or influence on the grand European stage. But Sophie herself, she possessed something far more potent than any inherited title or meager territory could ever provide. A razor-sharp, formidable intelligence, a relentless, captivating charm, and a quiet yet fiercely burning hunger for true greatness. Her upbringing was notably strict, almost austere. Her mother, Johanna, was a cold, calculating woman, less a warm, nurturing figure and more a relentless social climber, utterly obsessed with status, titles, and strategic advancement. Sophie's father, a stoic Prussian officer, was more a distant presence than a disciplinary force, often absent, either physically or emotionally. From a remarkably young age, Sophie learned to walk the precarious tightrope between outward obedience and subtle cunning. She read voraciously, devouring books with an insatiable appetite, mastering multiple languages with ease, and, crucially, learning the invaluable skill of meticulously observing and assessing an entire room before uttering a single, carefully chosen word. These were not mere accomplishments. These were the nascent survival tools that would soon become absolutely essential in one of Europe's most brutal, cutthroat courts. When the formidable Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began her extensive search for a suitable wife for her heir, the awkward and immature Grand Duke Peter, she shrewdly looked beyond Russia's own borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth harbored the strategic belief that a foreign bride, one who was perceived as pliable, grateful, and lacking a strong domestic power base, would be far easier to control and manipulate within the intricate web of court politics. Sophie, with her carefully cultivated demeanor and impeccable lineage, fit the bill perfectly. She possessed the requisite noble blood, adhered to the Lutheran faith, which, of course, she would be compelled to abandon, and carried a reputation for both innate grace and becoming humility,
qualities that masked a fierce inner resolve. At just 14 years old, a mere child, Sophie was summoned to the imposing, distant land of Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, clad in thin German fabrics ill-suited to the biting Russian winter, yet maintaining a perfectly practiced diplomatic smile. Her mother, ever the strategist, pushed her forward like a mere chess piece in a grand political game. Sophie, however, had her own far more ambitious game in mind, a game she intended to win. To become truly acceptable within the rigid confines of Russian society, she underwent a profound transformation, converting to the Eastern Orthodox faith and shedding her German name to embrace the new, distinctly Russian identity of Yekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The ceremony was a public spectacle, deeply symbolic and utterly life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions, she was irrevocably burning the bridge behind her, stepping with determined resolve into a foreign empire with no discernible way back to her past. No one observing that quiet, seemingly demure teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have possibly predicted the tumultuous saga that would unfold next, a dizzying tale of betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and the building of a vast empire. But from the very moment Sophie first stepped foot in the glittering, treacherous Russian court, she stopped being a pawn in others' games and began, with quiet intensity, planning precisely how to become a queen in her own right. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was intended to be the definitive key, securing her place within the hallowed halls of Russian royalty. Yet, from the very earliest days, it felt less like the bestowal of a crown and far more like entrapment within a gilded cage. Peter, the heir apparent to the sprawling Russian throne, was emphatically not the dashing, heroic prince of fairy tales. He was an awkward, deeply immature, and often petulant young man, whose singular obsession revolved around his vast collection of toy soldiers. He was demonstrably far more interested in meticulously staging elaborate war games within the confines of his private chambers than in grappling with the complex demands of governing an immense empire, or, indeed, showing even a modicum of affection to his new, young wife. Some historical accounts even suggest, quite shockingly, that he adamantly refused to consummate the marriage for several years, a deeply humiliating and politically dangerous situation. He openly idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy, and harbored a palpable resentment for the very Russian court that had adopted and elevated him. In stark, deliberate contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with a fierce, almost desperate determination. She painstakingly learned the complex Russian language, immersed herself in its rich, turbulent history, and diligently memorized the intricate Orthodox rituals. She desperately wanted to belong, to integrate herself fully. Peter, on the other hand, perpetually yearned to escape. This fundamental mismatch wasn't merely an emotional incompatibility. It was a profound political chasm that would define their lives. The Russian court itself was a viper's nest, a treacherous labyrinth of whispered gossip, rampant paranoia, and brutal, often lethal, power games. Empress Elizabeth still reigned with absolute, unyielding authority, but her health was visibly in decline. Everyone knew a monumental transition was looming, and everyone, from the lowliest servant to the most powerful noble, had a carefully concealed agenda. Catherine was subjected to constant, intrusive surveillance. Her private letters were routinely intercepted and read, her burgeoning friendships were meticulously monitored, and her every single move was scrutinized with hawk-like intensity. She learned quickly that she could not trust her own husband, whose loyalty was fleeting, nor her mother, who was still subtly whispering in her ear on behalf of foreign interests. nor even her own household servants, who might be spies for rival factions. In this cutthroat world, alliances could, and often did, turn into devastating accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She quickly learned to play the court's perilous games quietly, subtly, cultivating powerful allies in the shadows with masterful discretion. She charmed military officers, whose loyalty would prove invaluable, forged genuine friendships with influential scholars, and diligently developed a public reputation for dignity, intelligence, and remarkable restraint. A stark, favorable contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and his open, frequently insulting contempt for deeply cherished Russian traditions. Behind the closed, thick doors of her private chambers, Catherine embarked on a secret intellectual journey, voraciously reading the works of radical Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others at court dismissed her as merely a young foreign consort, she was, in fact, meticulously building a grand vision, not just for herself, but for the future of Russia itself, envisioning a nation of strength, widespread education, and enlightened reason. But there was one colossal problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained trapped in a suffocating limbo, a powerless wife to a man she knew, with chilling certainty, was fundamentally unfit to rule. So, with immense patience, she waited. She observed every slight, every misstep, every shift in the treacherous political winds, and she planned. She understood, with a clarity that few others possessed, that the Russian throne would not simply be inherited, it would, inevitably, have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 2 agonizing decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering through the treacherous currents of the Russian court, Catherine finally saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking, ruthless precision. Empress Elizabeth had at last succumbed to her ailments, and Peter, now officially Peter III, was finally Tsar. But his reign, ill-fated from its very inception, began to unravel almost immediately and with catastrophic speed. In just a few short, disastrous months, Peter managed to systematically alienate the powerful Orthodox Church, deeply offend the influential nobility, insult the revered army, and shamelessly lavish praise on Prussia, Russia's long-standing, bitter enemy. He reversed crucial, popular domestic policies, publicly humiliated the venerated clergy, and openly, foolishly, discussed divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress, Elizabeth Vorontsova. The entire court, already deeply wary of his erratic, unpredictable behavior, turned icily cold. The army, brimming with generals whose loyalty Catherine had painstakingly cultivated, grumbled ominously in the corridors of power. Even ordinary Russians, deeply devout and fiercely patriotic, came to view Peter as nothing more than a foreign puppet, a dilettante who openly mocked their sacred traditions and undermined their national pride. Watching all of this unfold with cold, calculating detachment, Catherine knew it was time to make her decisive move. In July of that same fateful year, while Peter was carelessly away at his summer palace in Oranienbaum, Catherine launched a swift, almost entirely bloodless coup d'etat. Supported by a crucial network of key military officers, including her charismatic lover, Gregory Orlov, and his immensely influential brothers, she rode triumphantly through the streets of St. Petersburg in full regalia, radiating an aura of undeniable authority. She was immediately proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and, critically, swiftly won the allegiance of the powerful Imperial Guard, the very backbone of Russian military power. Peter, caught completely off guard,
isolated and utterly devoid of allies, surrendered within a matter of days. He was taken into custody and, shortly thereafter, was found dead under circumstances that were, to say the least, profoundly mysterious. Officially, it was reported as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, and almost certainly, it was murder, a convenient removal of the last obstacle to Catherine's absolute power. Catherine was now empress, not by the divine right of birth, not through the legitimacy of marriage, but by sheer force of her own indomitable will, her piercing wit, and her breathtaking audacity. It was an unprecedented act. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate hereditary claim had seized the Russian throne without a single pitched battle, a testament to her strategic genius. But her real challenge, the true test of her reign, was just beginning. She now had to painstakingly transform that bold, audacious grab for power into a lasting, undeniable legacy. Would the vast, conservative Russian populace accept her as their sovereign? Would the powerful, often rebellious nobility truly respect her authority? Could she possibly hold the immense, disparate empire together without falling victim to the very same fate that had so conveniently befallen her husband? Catherine understood implicitly that power gained through intrigue and cunning could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule, not as a ruthless schemer, but as a visionary monarch, one who could inspire loyalty and command respect. And so began her extraordinary transformation. From a careful conspirator in the shadows to a reforming empress of global renown, a ruler who would redraw geopolitical borders, wholeheartedly embrace the radical ideals of the Enlightenment, and, in doing so, fundamentally redefine what it meant to be a woman in a position of supreme power. Once Catherine had firmly grasped the crown, she could have, quite understandably, rested on the laurels of her newly acquired power. But that was never her true intention. She harbored something far grander in mind than merely sitting comfortably upon a throne. She yearned to profoundly transform Russia, to elevate it not just militarily or politically, but, perhaps most importantly, intellectually. While her hapless predecessor, Peter, had slavishly worshipped Frederick the Great and spent his days playing with toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the audacious, progressive thinkers of the Enlightenment. She passionately believed in the power of reason, the inevitability of progress, the transformative potential of education, and the fundamental role of a monarch as a servant of the people. Even if she herself, with pragmatic resolve, ruled with absolute, unquestioned authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she quite literally lived it, actively engaging with its leading figures. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, skillfully flattering him while simultaneously defending the practical necessities of her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court, offering him sanctuary and support, and even purchased his entire library to support him financially during his struggles. Behind the closed doors of her private study, she pored over complex legal texts, vigorously debated potential reforms with her closest advisors, and meticulously crafted policies designed to wrench her vast, backward empire into the modern era. Her early reign was replete with ambitious efforts to codify and rationalize Russian law. She famously formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, an audacious, unprecedented project intended to completely rewrite the entire legal code of Russia, a task of staggering complexity. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, presented to this commission was a political manifesto disguised as a directive, a revolutionary document that boldly spoke of equality before the law, highlighted the dangers inherent in torture, and stressed the profound responsibility of rulers to genuinely serve the common good of their subjects. For an empress reigning in 18th century Russia, a land steeped in tradition and brutal hierarchy, these were truly radical, groundbreaking ideas. But these shimmering Enlightenment ideals had to contend with the harsh, often brutal realities of Russia itself. A sprawling, feudal, and deeply conservative land, firmly ruled by an entrenched nobility who liked their serfs exactly where they were, beneath them, as little more than chattel. Catherine understood this profound dichotomy intimately. While she publicly advocated for sweeping reform and progress, she moved with painstaking care, always mindful of the immense power of the nobility. She abolished some of the more egregious forms of torture, cautiously expanded access to secular education, and oversaw the construction of schools and libraries across the empire. Yet, crucially, she also reaffirmed the nobility's absolute control over their serfs, an uncomfortable but necessary concession designed to keep them loyal to her fledgling regime. This was Catherine's delicate, dangerous balancing act. A philosopher queen in public, projecting an image of enlightened benevolence, yet a fiercely practical empress in private, making the tough, often morally ambiguous decisions required for survival and stability. She walked a precarious tightrope between her lofty ideology and the stark realities of political survival, between the shining, intellectual salons of Paris and the gritty, brutal politics of Moscow. Her grand vision for Russia was undeniably bold, but it was always meticulously calculated, always tempered by a keen understanding of power. In many profound ways, Catherine wasn't merely trying to make Russia European. She was striving to make Russia modern, but strictly on her own formidable terms. And that meant reform, yes, but always delivered with an iron hand encased in a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content with merely reforming Russia from within. Her ambition stretched far beyond its current borders. She wanted to expand it outward, to sculpt it into an empire truly worthy of fear, admiration, and envy across the globe. Where Peter the Great had, generations before, opened a metaphorical window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down entire walls, expanding Russia's influence and territory with aggressive zeal. Under her formidable leadership, Russia's vast borders stretched wider than ever before, encompassing new lands and peoples. She waged wars not simply to defend her newly acquired crown, but with the explicit aim of fundamentally reshaping the entire map of Europe. One of her most significant and strategically vital campaigns was against the ancient, sprawling Ottoman Empire, a formidable rival. These wars, fought in successive waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, weren't solely about acquiring territory. They were profoundly about asserting Russian influence and dominance in a crucial region. Catherine deftly portrayed herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule, positioning herself as the rightful, divinely ordained protector of Eastern Europe against what she framed as an encroaching Islamic power. Under the brilliant military leadership of generals like the legendary Alexander Suvorov and her influential favorite, Grigory Potemkin, Russia achieved stunning victories, capturing key regions that had been coveted for centuries. These included the strategically vital Crimea, the entire northern coast of the Black Sea, and, most critically, coveted access to warm water ports, a geopolitical prize that Russian czars had yearned for generations. These victories were far more than mere military triumphs. They were deeply symbolic, sending an unmistakable message across Europe. With each conquest, Catherine solidified Russia's position as a burgeoning superpower, a force to be reckoned with. Russia, once dismissed as a distant, backward cousin of the European powers, was rapidly asserting itself as a formidable continental force, a narrative painstakingly crafted by Catherine the Great. Her gaze, while focused on strengthening Russia's internal affairs, also turned decisively westward, particularly towards the ailing Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Through a complex web of shrewd deals, diplomatic manipulations, and military pressure, Catherine orchestrated Russia's participation in the infamous partitions of Poland. Alongside Austria and Prussia, she systematically carved up the vast but politically fractured Commonwealth. By the conclusion of the Third Partition in 1795, a sovereign Poland was tragically erased from the map of Europe, its ancient legacy subsumed. Russia, in this grand imperial chess game, claimed immense new territories and, with them, millions of new subjects, extending its influence deeper into the heart of Europe. But Catherine's conquests were not solely waged with armies. She also embarked on an ambitious program of colonization with ideas, shaping her vast empire not just by force, but by vision. New cities, like the strategic Black Sea port of Odessa, were meticulously planned and constructed, becoming vibrant hubs of trade and culture. Trade routes were dramatically expanded, knitting together the far-flung regions of her domain. In a bold move to modernize agriculture and populate newly acquired lands, German settlers were invited, even encouraged, to cultivate vast swaths of Russian farmland, bringing with them advanced farming techniques and a new demographic layer. Her empire blossomed into a sprawling mosaic of cultures, languages, and landscapes, stretching from the icy, often tumultuous shores of the Baltic Sea to the sun-drenched, strategic coastlines of the Black Sea. And through every monumental shift, Catherine remained the unwavering central force, a tireless monarch who devoured reports, meticulously issued orders, and personally, almost obsessively, oversaw the intricate shape of her ever-expanding empire. Of course, such relentless ambition drew its share of condemnation. Critics, particularly from Enlightenment-era Europe, would accuse her of being ruthlessly power-hungry, even brazenly imperialistic. Yet, to Catherine, this relentless expansion was far more than mere personal ambition. It was, in her profound conviction, Russia's undeniable destiny. A truly great ruler, she believed, was not merely measured by abstract philosophical ideas or enlightened principles, but by the tangible expansion and security of their borders. She aspired to more than simply governing Russia. She yearned to fundamentally remake it as a truly civilized empire, a force to be feared by its adversaries, a peer to be respected by the great powers of Europe, and an entity bound in unwavering loyalty to her alone. Beyond her brilliance in statecraft and her formidable grasp on power, Catherine the Great was equally, if not more, famous for the tumultuous whispers and scandalous events that unfolded behind the ornate doors of her palaces. And no, not all of it was relegated to the hushed tones of private libraries. Much of it spilled into public discourse, fueling both awe and outrage. Catherine's private life, particularly her numerous romantic liaisons, became one of the most talked-about aspects of her legendary reign. She had lovers, not just a casual dalliance or two, but a carefully curated, almost institutionalized parade of them. Many were decades younger, invariably handsome, and often, quite significantly, politically influential. Far from concealing these relationships, Catherine embraced them openly. Indeed, she often lavished her favorites with prestigious titles, sprawling estates, and generous pensions, provided they conducted themselves with discretion and loyalty. If, however, they proved troublesome or indiscreet, they were quietly but decisively dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you,
and, ironically, a promotion to a distant, less influential post. Among the most enduring and historically significant of these paramours was Grigory Potemkin, a man as intellectually brilliant as he was militarily bold. Their relationship transcended mere romance, blurring the very lines between passionate love, astute politics, and an unparalleled partnership in governance. Some historians even posit they may have secretly married, an ultimate testament to their bond. Together, this powerful duo shaped Russia's most critical military campaigns, spearheaded ambitious colonization projects, and orchestrated the dramatic transformation of southern Russia, turning vast wilderness into productive land. Potemkin, therefore, was far more than just a lover. In many tangible ways, he functioned as her co-ruler, her indispensable political and strategic partner. Still, for many in Europe, particularly within the moralizing salons and courts, the scandal of a powerful female monarch with multiple lovers proved irresistible and overshadowing. Gossip swirled like wildfire. Satirical pamphlets, often vicious and misogynistic, painted her as lustful, insatiable, even emotionally unhinged. And tragically, after her death, these rumors only intensified, metastasizing into grotesque fabrications. The most infamous, a completely false and abhorrent tale involving a horse, was maliciously spread by her political enemies, specifically designed to tarnish her towering legacy. But why such an obsessive focus on her private life? The answer, in retrospect, is simple yet profound. Catherine was a woman who wielded absolute power unapologetically, a stark anomaly in her time. In a world where female rulers were conventionally expected to embody either saintly virginity or tragic passive victimhood, she defiantly refused to play any prescribed role. She lived, she loved, and she ruled entirely on her own terms, and that very autonomy made her, in the eyes of a patriarchal establishment, truly dangerous. Ironically, while her critics vehemently painted her as immoral and debauched, Catherine herself harbored a deeply philosophical and surprisingly modern perspective on love and sexuality. She genuinely believed that pleasure was a natural and integral part of human life, and that personal relationships, when managed with discretion and intelligence, did not inherently threaten public responsibility or the duties of a monarch. She possessed a remarkable ability to separate emotion from the intricate machinery of governance, a feat few male rulers, often driven by personal vendettas or dynastic passions, ever truly managed. In reality, her liaisons were frequently strategic. She intentionally surrounded herself with men who were not only charming and capable, but also fiercely loyal and politically useful. And when they ceased to be either, she released them, usually with a disarming smile and a generous, comfortable retirement package. Catherine's much gossiped about love life, far from weakening her rule, was, in fact, an integral part of her broader strategy, a sophisticated blend of passion and power that made her an unforgettable, envied, and ultimately a feared figure on the European stage. Yet, for all her charisma and meticulous control, Catherine's magnificent reign was not without its profound perils. And in 1773, that peril manifested dramatically in the form of a charismatic, bearded Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. Pugachev made the audacious claim to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's deceased husband, miraculously resurrected. According to his mesmerizing narrative, he had miraculously survived the coup that deposed him and had now returned to reclaim his rightful throne from the German usurper. The claim was, of course, utterly absurd. Peter had been dead for years, but to Russia's vast, oppressed, and exhausted lower classes, the serfs, the Cossacks, the old believers,
The veracity of the claim was secondary. It simply needed to offer hope. Pugachev's promises were potent: liberation from serfdom, an end to crushing taxes, and the redistribution of land for the common people. His words ignited a raging fire across the sprawling Volga River region, particularly among the fiercely independent Cossacks, downtrodden peasants, and conservative old believers, all of whom felt deeply marginalized by the imperial system. In a brutal era when the chasm between the opulent nobility and the enslaved serfs had widened to a horrifying degree, Pugachev's promises resonated like the very sound of salvation. The Pugachev rebellion rapidly escalated into the largest peasant uprising in all of Russian history, a terrifying testament to the depths of public discontent. Towns fell, fortresses were besieged, and nobles were slaughtered with vengeful fury. For a terrifying, precarious moment, it seemed as if the vast Russian Empire itself might fracture, torn apart from within. Catherine, for all her composure, was deeply shaken. This was not a foreign war, a geopolitical game she could win with superior cavalry and diplomatic treaties. This was an internal revolt, a primal scream from her own people, rising against the very system she ruled. But Catherine, true to her indomitable nature, did not panic. She acted with ruthless efficiency. She immediately dispatched her professional military forces, hardened by foreign wars, to crush the rebellion without mercy. Pugachev's disorganized forces were decisively defeated in 1774. He was captured, publicly displayed in an iron cage as a spectacle of imperial might, and eventually beheaded in Moscow, a brutal public warning to all who dared to challenge her authority. In the aftermath of the rebellion, Catherine doubled down on strict order and unwavering control. Her earlier, more liberal dreams of eventually liberating the serfs, once a whisper of Enlightenment ideals, quietly faded into silence, overshadowed by the brutal realities of power. The Pugachev rebellion had starkly shown her the severe limits of Enlightenment philosophy, in a country still shackled by the intractable chains of feudalism. She now leaned harder than ever on the powerful nobility, who, in exchange for their unquestioning loyalty to the crown, were granted absolute and often crueler control over their serfs. This marked a profound turning point in her reign. The empress who had once corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot now prioritized stability above abstract philosophy. Reforms became cautious, surveillance intensified, and any whisper of rebellion, no matter how faint, was to be stomped out before it could even draw breath. Pugachev may have lost his head, but he left behind a chilling warning that haunted Catherine's conscience. That power built on such profound inequality could only hold for so long before the inevitable storm came crashing through. By the time Catherine the Great approached the final, twilight years of her extraordinary life, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, a tenure longer than any female ruler in Russian history. From the very moment she seized power, she had relentlessly defied expectations, fundamentally reshaped her sprawling empire, and, in doing so, redefined what a woman and a monarch could truly be. Under Catherine's transformative reign, Russia ascended to become a true European powerhouse, a force to be reckoned with on the global stage. Its territory expanded by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing strategically vital lands such as Crimea, significant portions of Poland, and vast stretches of the Black Sea coast. These were not merely military victories. They were strategic pivots, securing invaluable warm-water ports and fundamentally reshaping global trade routes and Russia's geopolitical influence. Yet her monumental legacy was not merely etched onto maps. Catherine also left an indelible cultural mark on Russia. She played a pivotal role in founding the illustrious Hermitage Museum, amassing one of the greatest art collections in all of Europe,
rivaling those of Paris and London. She corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment, Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert, making her court a vibrant center of sophistication, artistic patronage, and profound intellectual ambition. In a country often disparagingly viewed as backward by Western Europeans, Catherine decisively put Russia firmly on the cultural and intellectual map. She modernized education, bravely founding schools for girls, a revolutionary concept at the time, and vigorously promoted the printing and dissemination of books. In an act of remarkable scientific bravery for her era, she introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, demonstrating a personal commitment to Enlightenment ideals that sometimes outshone her political compromises. Yet, her reign was also a complex tapestry of profound contradictions. While she deeply admired Enlightenment ideals of liberty and human rights, she famously never freed the serfs. In fact, tragically, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's newly acquired territories, tightening the very chains she sometimes professed to deplore. Her reforms, while undeniably impressive in their scope and ambition, remained mostly top-down, designed primarily to polish the empire's outward appearance and administrative efficiency, without truly transforming its deeply entrenched feudal foundations. Still, for all its complexities, Catherine's rule brought unprecedented stability and propelled Russia's ambition onto a grander scale. She possessed a profound understanding that power was not simply inherited or divinely bestowed. It was meticulously crafted, skillfully managed, and fiercely defended at every turn. She ruled not by some ancient divine right, but by sheer force of will, unparalleled political brilliance, and relentless, calculating intellect. She was called many things by her contemporaries and by history: a usurper, a tyrant, a visionary reformer, a captivating seductress. But above all, she was undeniably effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and infinitely more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne securely consolidated, an empire dramatically expanded, and a legend that would resonate and endure for centuries to come. Catherine didn't merely reign, she ruled, with a towering intellect, strategic genius, and an unapologetic grip on the trajectory of history. And in doing so, she transcended the role of empress. She became a myth. For all her unparalleled power, her expansive territorial gains, and her enduring legacy, Catherine the Great remained, at her core, a woman meticulously navigating a world overwhelmingly dominated by men, and resolutely reshaping it in her own formidable image. Behind the grand imperial portraits and the myriad state decrees lay a sovereign profoundly aware of just how precarious her position truly was. She was not born Russian, a foreigner on the throne. She ascended to power through a dramatic coup, overthrowing her own husband. She ruled a vast, conservative empire that historically often resented the idea of a woman in charge. And yet, against all odds, she not only endured, she unequivocally thrived. Catherine was never content to be merely ornamental, a figurehead. She read constantly, devoured books and reports, wrote endlessly, and never ceased her relentless pursuit of knowledge. Her daily schedule was intensely rigorous, a punishing regimen of hours spent analyzing complex state reports, corresponding with foreign powers, meticulously editing crucial state papers, and artfully managing a court brimming with rival factions and treacherous intrigues. She wasn't content to simply sit on the throne. She worked the throne with the skill and gravitas of a stateswoman born to it. She was also, in many profound ways, lonely.
While surrounded by courtiers, lovers, and artists, she poignantly wrote in her memoirs of how few people she could truly trust with her innermost thoughts and fears. Her son, Paul, whom she deeply distrusted and intentionally kept far away from matters of state, grew into a man she feared would systematically undo all her hard-won progress. Her greatest emotional and intellectual partnership with Grigory Potemkin eventually mellowed into a deep, abiding friendship. But his death in 1791 left a gaping wound that never truly healed. Catherine, a master of public relations, meticulously crafted her own image. She intuitively understood the immense power of narrative and wielded it with greater skill than most monarchs of her age. She posed alternately as the benevolent Mother of Russia, an enlightened monarch, a fearless warrior empress, and a devoted lover of the arts. But beneath those carefully constructed roles was a woman who had endured profound rejection, brutal betrayal, public scandal, and violent rebellion. And yet she kept going, driven by an unyielding will. When she died in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, but also a lingering array of questions that continue to fuel historical debate. Could she have done more to abolish serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals ultimately compromised by political expediency? Was she more reformer or ruthless ruler? History remembers her by the title she never formally gave herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was flawless or inherently kind or perfectly just. It was because she took power, an outsider woman, and wielded it entirely on her own terms, in a time and place where women were categorically not supposed to have any at all. She didn't just wear the crown. She fundamentally rewrote what it meant to deserve one. In the humid, emerald depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the majestic ruins of Palenque continue to whisper ancient stories from the heart of the Maya world. Towering temples, their once vibrant limestone faces now softened and eroded by centuries of time and tropical rain, still rise majestically above the dense canopy, brimming with untold secrets. And in the auspicious year of 1994, one of those most profound secrets dramatically revealed itself. A dedicated team of Mexican archaeologists, meticulously led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was conducting a routine survey of Temple 13, a relatively modest pyramid nestled humbly next to the far more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the revered burial site of the mighty King Kinich Janab Pakal the Great. Temple 13 wasn't expected to yield anything of monumental significance until the team noticed something distinctly odd, a sealed, previously hidden chamber nestled deep beneath the structure. Astonishingly, no looters had ever touched it. It was pristine, utterly untouched for over a millennium. When the archaeologists painstakingly broke through the ancient seal and lowered themselves into the cool, silent darkness within, they discovered a grand stone sarcophagus resting in profound stillness. The air itself felt heavy, imbued with the palpable weight of centuries. As they gingerly opened the massive lid, a cloud of brilliant, shocking red dust billowed upwards like ethereal smoke, a mesmerizing crimson spectacle. The entire interior of the sarcophagus, the walls, and the very bones within were lavishly covered in powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide prized by the ancient Maya for its ceremonial and symbolic potency. And lying within that vibrant crimson cloud was the exquisitely preserved skeleton of a woman. She had been interred with an extraordinary degree of care and reverence. Her fragile bones were remarkably intact, and her skull still wore a magnificent jade mosaic mask, its polished pieces gleaming faintly. Her body was surrounded by a rich array of funerary offerings, intricate necklaces, delicate diadems, and elegant ear spools, all meticulously crafted from precious jade and shell. Everything about this opulent burial screamed royalty, divine favor, and immense prestige. Yet, paradoxically, no name was inscribed anywhere. No glyphs identified her, leaving her identity a profound mystery. It was, in fact, one of the richest female burials ever unearthed in Mesoamerica, and yet it remained a total enigma. Why was she bathed in red powder? Who was she, this woman of such obvious importance? Was she a revered queen, a powerful priestess, or perhaps even the beloved wife of Pakal himself? The awestruck researchers, captivated by the vibrant crimson surrounding her, fittingly christened her the Red Queen, and the evocative name immediately stuck. But even with the most advanced modern forensics, they could not definitively ascertain her identity, only that she had lived around the 7th century, during the glorious golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers had been meticulously hidden, left entirely untouched, and seemingly purposefully isolated. Her burial was more than just ceremonial. It was profoundly spiritual. This woman, it seemed, was not meant to be remembered with mere words or inscriptions. She was destined to be remembered through ritual, through the potent symbolism of color, and through the haunting, enduring mystery she left behind. The most haunting, indeed the most unforgettable, feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't her magnificent jade jewelry or the eerie silence of the sealed chamber. It was the ubiquitous, thick layer of powdered cinnabar that covered everything within the sarcophagus. It clung like ancient blood to the stone surfaces, coating her bones, the walls of the tomb, and even the surrounding offerings in a brilliant, shocking red. To the Maya, this crimson saturation was no accident of preservation. It was an act of profound, deliberate intention. Cinnabar, meticulously made from crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and dangerously potent substances in their ancient world. Its vibrant red color was not merely visually striking, it was deeply symbolic, representing life-giving blood, the eternal cycle of rebirth, and the vital life force that inextricably connected the human and divine realms. Red was sacred. It was the vivid color of the rising sun, of sacrificial offerings, and of life itself, powerfully emerging from the embrace of death. And its significance was not just symbolic, it was spiritual, ritualistic. Covering the deceased in cinnabar was a sacred rite intended to transform the body, preserving it not for a static eternity, but for an active, spiritual transition. In Maya belief, death was never the final end. It was simply a passage, a crossing into another, deeper cosmic layer of existence. And so, the Red Queen, whoever she was in life, was being meticulously prepared not merely for burial, but for an ascent, a profound deification. But there was yet another layer to this potent ritual. Cinnabar is inherently toxic. Repeated, prolonged exposure can lead to severe mercury poisoning, manifesting in tremors, vivid hallucinations, and even death. While the ancient Maya likely did not possess a scientific understanding of its precise chemistry, they undeniably felt and revered its intense potency. It was volatile, undeniably powerful, and inherently dangerous. To ritualistically bathe a corpse in such a substance was to declare, without a single spoken word, that this person was no ordinary mortal. Indeed, in all of Palenque, very few individuals were accorded the honor of burial with cinnabar. Kinich Janab Pakal the Great, the mighty king whose towering pyramid dominates the site, was one such exception. His body, much like hers, was also saturated in the same vibrant red powder.
That singular shared detail immediately fueled intense speculation among archaeologists. Was the Red Queen his wife, his revered mother, or perhaps someone of an equally profound divine status? Her skull, moreover, had been carefully placed on a layer of jaguar skin, another potent symbol of royalty and spiritual power in Maya culture. Around her, bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines hinted at complex rituals performed either during her earthly life or, more likely, in her solemn honor at the time of her death. Every intricate part of her burial told a compelling story without words, a narrative of immense power cloaked in an aura of profound secrecy. It spoke of a woman prepared to cross into the underworld, not in silence, but in an elaborate, breathtaking ceremony, drenched in the sacred, transformative color of sacrifice. Surrounding the Red Queen's crimson-drenched remains was a world of profound silence, broken only by the faint, eternal gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian. These were not mere personal ornaments, carelessly tossed into a grave. They were meticulously chosen offerings, each imbued with spiritual significance, designed to accompany her on the perilous journey to the Maya afterlife, the formidable Xibalba. At her sides lay multiple jade necklaces, heavy and cool to the touch, their polished surfaces still radiating a subtle luster after more than 1,300 years entombed underground. Jade, for the Maya, was far more than simply beautiful. It was sacred, possessing profound symbolic power. They revered it as a vibrant symbol of eternal life, representing the lush green of maize, the life-giving vitality of the jungle, and the very breath of the gods themselves. Only the highest elite, those of unparalleled status and divine favor, were ever buried with such an abundance of jade. For the Red Queen, it covered her chest, adorned her wrists, and graced her ears, a clear, unmistakable sign that in life she wielded immense influence, perhaps even direct divine favor. One of the most profoundly haunting objects was the intricate jade mosaic funerary mask, placed with delicate precision over her face. Unlike the monolithic golden death masks of ancient Egypt, this one was subtle, a masterpiece constructed from dozens of tiny, meticulously cut mosaic tiles, artfully arranged to mimic the contours of her skull. The mask served a critical ritual function: to protect the soul on its journey, to preserve her identity in the spiritual realm, and to present her as a divine, glorified being in the eyes of the underworld gods. Scattered near her fragile bones were a collection of finely crafted bone needles, razor-sharp obsidian blades, and delicate shell artifacts. These enigmatic objects could have been tools used in sacred rituals during her lifetime, or potent symbols of her elevated status as a priestess, a revered healer, or a powerful royal matriarch. One particular bone pin bore a faint but purposeful engraving, a small, tantalizing echo of her voice, forever lost to the relentless currents of time. At her feet, and carefully positioned along the edges of the tomb chamber, were several ceramic vessels, still sealed, likely once filled with precious offerings, perhaps food, sacred drink, or fragrant incense, intended to sustain her spirit beyond the veil of death. The Maya believed that the afterlife was a challenging, multi-layered journey, fraught with dangers and trials. These items, therefore, were not mere luxuries. They were vital necessities for her spiritual voyage. To modernize, the tomb feels remarkably intimate, not overloaded with ostentation, but filled with profound intention. There was no shimmering gold, no grand chariots, no excessive pomp, just items chosen with meticulous spiritual weight. It was, in essence, a sacred map for the soul.
Through these enduring treasures, we gain a precious glimpse into how the Maya profoundly understood death, not as a terrifying finality, but as a majestic transition of power. The Red Queen was not interred to be forgotten. She was being meticulously prepared to ascend. For all the understated grandeur of her tomb, the Red Queen left behind one haunting, persistent void: no name. No inscriptions adorned her magnificent sarcophagus, nor did any glyphs on the chamber walls identify her. She was, unmistakably, someone of immense power and importance, a pivotal figure in the royal court. But who, precisely? From the very moment her tomb was opened, scholars embarked on an intense quest to connect the tantalizing dots of her identity. The most compelling and widely accepted theory posits that the Red Queen was Tsakbu Ajah, the revered wife of Kinich Janab Pakal, known today to history as Pakal the Great, the most famous and influential ruler of Palenque. Tsakbu Ajah was far more than just Pakal's consort. She was born into the highest nobility and married into Palenque's powerful royal dynasty at a young age. She bore at least 3 sons, all of whom rose to hold high status within the royal line, and she played a crucial ceremonial role during her illustrious husband's reign, an indispensable spiritual counterpart. If anyone could justly be buried with such extraordinary honor, it was surely she. Supporting this compelling theory was the tomb's precise location, just a few feet away from Pakal's own grand, iconic burial chamber within the Temple of the Inscriptions. This close proximity strongly suggests a deliberate pairing, a sacred bond between husband and wife, co-rulers even in death, destined to lie eternally side by side. And then there was the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in all of Palenque were discovered with such an intense and extensive coverage of cinnabar, Pakal's and the Red Queen's. It is exceedingly unlikely that this remarkable shared detail was a mere coincidence. However, this is precisely where the mystery deepens, refusing easy resolution. DNA tests were meticulously conducted on both sets of remains, in the hopes of unequivocally confirming a direct familial or marital connection. But the results were frustratingly inconclusive. The woman's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pakal. Yet, significantly, this finding did not rule out a spousal relationship, as marriage, after all, does not require shared bloodlines. Some scholars have argued that she could have been Sakkuk, Pakal's powerful and influential mother, who impressively ruled Palenque as queen regent before her son came of age. Others suggest she may have been a high priestess, a beloved sister, or another venerated royal ancestor whose name has simply been lost to history's relentless erosion. Still, the weight of the available archaeological evidence points most strongly towards Tsakbu Ajah, queen by title, a mother of kings, and a spiritual counterpart of immense significance to Pakal. The haunting lack of a name may not have been an oversight at all. It may, in fact, have been intentional. In Maya cosmology, the soul's enduring life was believed to live on, not through inscribed monuments or written words, but through sacred ritual, potent symbol, and the eternal, whispered memory of the earth itself. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended, eternally poised between tantalizing legend and elusive truth. A woman who ruled, remembered not in stone, but in brilliant scarlet and profound silence. To truly understand the enigmatic Red Queen, we must first understand the intricate, complex world she emerged from. A world where Maya women, particularly those of royal lineage, wielded far more influence and power than than many historical narratives often acknowledge. In Maya civilization, politics was often an intensely personal and profoundly familial affair. Royal women were far from passive consorts or mere symbols. They were often shrewd diplomats, powerful priestesses, and indispensable power brokers. They regularly conducted elaborate rituals, sponsored the construction of magnificent temples, and played absolutely crucial roles in maintaining dynastic legitimacy and continuity. Their sacred bloodlines were considered potent political capital, strategically utilized to forge vital alliances with other city-states and to secure unwavering claims to the throne. Take, for instance, the remarkable Sak-Kuk, the mother of Pakal the Great. When the throne of Palenque was left tragically vacant during a time of crisis, she bravely took power herself and ruled with authority as queen regent until her son was old enough to assume his duties. She was no mere placeholder. She was a ruler in her own unequivocal right, issuing decrees, managing state affairs, and overseeing significant construction projects. Without her unwavering leadership, it is entirely possible that Pakal may never have risen to power at all. And she was not an anomaly. Across the vast Maya world, in powerful city-states like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, ancient inscriptions clearly depict women performing major public ceremonies, engaging in complex warfare diplomacy, and, in some cases, even ruling outright as queens in their own names. They were often portrayed in intricately carved stelae and vibrant murals, adorned in elaborate headdresses and regal regalia, standing proudly beside kings as equals, or sometimes even elevated above them. Their words were meticulously carved in glyphs, their names remembered for centuries until, tragically, they weren't. By the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived centuries later, much of that rich memory had already eroded. The colonial lens, often patriarchal and dismissive, saw native women primarily as silent figures in a male-dominated world. But the archaeology, the undeniable voice of the earth, tells a profoundly different story, one of complex gender roles where power was actively negotiated, fiercely competed for, and skillfully managed, rather than simply inherited. This crucial historical context casts the Red Queen in a new, revealing light. She may not have ruled in name, but her burial-rich, sacred, and strategically positioned beside Pakal strongly suggests she was a central, indispensable pillar in the royal order of Palenque. Her jade mask wasn't just decoration. It was a potent symbol of identity, of immense power, held in life and meticulously protected in death. Her powerful bloodline may well have been the very glue that held Palenque's dynasty together during its golden age. In Maya civilization, a queen was not just a queen. She was a sacred keeper of lineage, a powerful voice in ceremony, and often the vital bridge between the gods and mortal men. The Red Queen may be nameless to us, but in her world, she was undoubtedly never voiceless. The Red Queen wasn't merely buried with treasures. She was interred within architecture rich with profound purpose, deeply layered with Maya cosmology, intricate ritual symbolism, and intentional design. Her tomb was not simply a grave. It was conceived as a sacred gateway to eternity. Her body was discovered deep inside Temple 13, one of the smaller, more discreet pyramids nestled within the bustling heart of Palenque. Yet its close proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the majestic resting place of Pakal the Great, is profoundly telling. These temples were not built randomly or haphazardly. Their precise positioning was sacred, meticulously guided by ancient astrology, foundational myths, and the overarching dynastic legacy of the ruling family. Temple 13 rises modestly, almost discreetly,
compared to its grander, more famous neighbor. But within its unassuming structure, it concealed something even more intimate and extraordinary. A perfectly sealed crypt, miraculously untouched by looters for centuries, impeccably preserved in its original state. It was deliberately constructed deep within the temple's core, accessible only by a steep, narrow, almost winding staircase. The descent into her tomb, therefore, feels almost symbolic, a deliberate ritual journey downward into the mysterious depths of the underworld, the Xibalba. The chamber itself is stark, crafted from precisely cut stone blocks, sealed tightly for over 1,300 years. No elaborate glyphs or vibrant murals cover the walls. No ornate carvings overtly tell her story. But perhaps that very silence is intentional. This was a sacred space not for the living to interpret or adorn, but for the dead to undergo a profound, spiritual transformation. At the very center, her sarcophagus sits like a sacred altar, meticulously crafted from solid limestone. It subtly echoes the grand stone coffin of Pakal next door, a silent testament to their shared status and enduring, mysterious bond. While Pakal's sarcophagus lid is famously etched with an intricate cosmic tableau of his descent into the underworld and subsequent rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb presented a more understated, yet profoundly intimate narrative. Here, the focus was deliberately turned inward, emphasizing the body itself, the transformative power of cinnabar, and the solemn ritual of death. Nevertheless, subtle architectural clues within the chamber whispered volumes of deeper meaning. The tomb, for instance, was meticulously aligned east to west, a symbolic path mirroring the sun's primordial journey from the vibrant embrace of life to the profound stillness of death, a daily cycle of cosmic renewal. The chamber itself, though compact, exuded an undeniable aura of power. It felt less like a mere burial place and more like a deliberate, deeply personal and consecrated enclosure, a sacred space reserved for someone of immense reverence. For the ancient Maya, temples were far more than structures of worship. They were cosmological instruments, potent bridges connecting the celestial heavens, the terrestrial earth, and the mysterious underworld. To be interred within the sacred confines of such a structure was to be elevated beyond the ephemeral human realm, a direct ascent into the divine. The Red Queen's eternal dwelling was thus no afterthought. It was a carefully conceived shrine, a liminal space where the boundaries of death blurred and transformation became not just a possibility, but an imperative. Her bones found their final rest in stone. Her essence was dramatically preserved in cinnabar, and her enduring legacy was woven into the very architecture that embraced her. It was a temple that communicated without glyphs, its silent presence proclaiming her unparalleled significance. To the ancient Maya, death was never conceived as an absolute end. Rather, it was a threshold, a sacred passage into the sprawling, subterranean realm known as Xibalba, or Xibalba. And for a personage of the Red Queen's stature, this crossing was not merely spiritual, it was intricately political, profoundly cosmological, and meticulously ritualized. Burial rituals were carefully choreographed events, deeply rooted in complex myths, and designed with the singular purpose of guiding the departed soul through the treacherous, multi-layered labyrinth of the underworld. Maya texts and vivid iconography portray Xibalba not as a serene afterlife, but as a perilous maze of impenetrable darkness, crisscrossed by rivers of blood, punctuated by harrowing trials, and overseen by formidable gods of death. Only those properly interred, ritually prepared, and spiritually fortified could hope to successfully navigate this perilous journey. The Red Queen was found carefully buried, lavishly wrapped in layers of crimson cinnabar, encased within a stone sarcophagus, and surrounded by a wealth of meticulously chosen offerings.
These were all unequivocal hallmarks of an elite burial, signaling immense status. But there was more. The presence of delicate bone needles and razor-sharp obsidian blades in her tomb strongly hinted at the practice of auto-sacrifice rituals, the ceremonial bloodletting that was a crucial component of royal Maya piety. These items were possibly symbolic tools representing powerful rites she had performed in life, or perhaps they were reenacted at her burial, intended to imbue her spirit with additional power for its arduous journey. Her funerary mask, meticulously assembled from hundreds of tiny jade tiles, was not merely a decorative flourish. It may have served as a vital spiritual vessel, a sacred effigy preserving her face and identity, ensuring that her soul would be recognized by the formidable deities as she ventured into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face was considered a direct mirror of the soul, and recognition was paramount for safe passage. The ceramic vessels surrounding her, perhaps once filled with precious chocolate, maize gruel, pure water, or even the potent fermented drink pulque, were meant to nourish her in the next world, sustenance for an eternal existence. Other items, such as the sharp stingray spines or the resonant shell trumpets, could have represented essential spiritual tools, powerful calls to the gods, or tokens signifying ritual communication and authority. Her burial was far more than a final goodbye. It was the initiation of a grand transformation. The Maya believed deeply in cycles. Death was the seed, burial the planting, and the afterlife the promise of rebirth. Kings and queens, viewed as earthly incarnations of divine beings, were expected in death to return to those sacred origins. The Red Queen, her body suffused with the color of blood and life, entombed within a pyramid and honored with an abundance of offerings, was being meticulously prepared not for a mortal's end, but for a profound rebirth, not as a human, but as a being inextricably tied to the sacred order of the cosmos. Her burial was not the conclusion of her story, it was the genesis of her legend. Just a few steps away from the Red Queen's meticulously preserved final resting place lies one of the most iconic tombs in all of Mesoamerica, that of Kinich Janab Pakal, known simply as Pakal the Great. His burial within the magnificent Temple of the Inscriptions is justly celebrated for its breathtaking artistry, monumental scale, and deeply resonant spiritual symbolism. Yet what renders the Red Queen's tomb truly extraordinary is not solely its rich contents, but its precise location. Her sarcophagus was discovered hidden within Temple 13, situated directly adjacent to Pakal's monumental structure. In a sophisticated city-state like Palenque, where every temple was meticulously positioned to reflect complex cosmic principles, this intimate closeness was no mere happenstance. It was an intentional, deliberate statement, etched immutably in stone. Many scholars now believe with compelling evidence that the Red Queen was none other than Ixtzakpu Ajah, Pakal's revered queen and trusted consort. While her tomb, unlike his, astonishingly lacks explicit royal inscriptions detailing her name or lineage, the striking similarities between their burials are too profound to ignore. Both were lavishly wrapped in cinnabar. Both were entombed within the heart of pyramids. Both were interred with precious jade offerings, and both were clearly treated with extreme reverence. These mirror image rituals resonate like two halves of a singular, sacred narrative. Pakal's sarcophagus lid famously depicts him in a moment of cosmic transition, falling into the maw of the underworld tree, a dynamic scene of death, celestial descent, and eventual rebirth. The Red Queen's simpler tomb, by contrast, contains no such elaborate iconography. However, the profound symbolism lies in the very pairing itself,
in their complementary juxtaposition. If Pakal embodied the sun, bravely journeying through the perilous underworld at night, only to rise again each dawn, then the Red Queen may have represented the moon, the equally powerful feminine force that traces its own mysterious, cyclical path across the night sky. Together, they embodied a fundamental cosmic duality: masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual, a complete, harmonious universe. In Maya mythology and political ideology, rulership was rarely singular. It was fundamentally relational. Harmony in the cosmos, and by extension, stability within the dynastic court, absolutely required balance. And that balance extended perfectly into the royal partnership. By placing the Red Queen's sacred remains beside Pakal's, the Maya were preserving not merely the memory of a marriage, but the profound essence of a cosmic partnership. Their intimate proximity in death may have been a direct reflection of their complementary roles in life. A queen not merely behind, but powerfully beside her king, sharing not just a throne, but a formidable, enduring legacy. In their silent tombs, they speak without words, two souls enveloped in cinnabar and stone, joined across eternity in one of history's most sacred silences. Though her original name was tragically lost to the unforgiving currents of time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the most enigmatic and undeniably powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, hermetically sealed for over 1,300 years, now whispers across centuries, inviting questions that resonate ever louder with each new discovery. She represents a profound mystery that still resists complete understanding, a captivating puzzle box yet to be fully unlocked. We may never definitively know her exact identity. No carved glyph proudly bears her name. No towering stele recounts her personal story. And yet, the unparalleled care lavished upon her burial, the astonishing richness of her offerings, and the powerful symbolism of her crimson-drenched bones all speak volumes of a woman who was profoundly important, not merely as a wife or consort, but as someone who wielded tangible influence, possessed immense spiritual weight, and carried royal blood of significant lineage. Today, the Red Queen compels us to reevaluate long-held assumptions about gender roles and power dynamics in the ancient world. She stands as a potent reminder that in the sophisticated ancient Maya world, women were far from silent or subservient. They led intricate rituals, governed sprawling cities, shaped powerful dynasties, and left an indelible mark on history. While iconic kings like Pakal have long commanded the historical spotlight, the Red Queen's re-emergence reminds us with striking clarity that power did not belong exclusively to men. It flowed equally through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy transcends the mere treasures she left behind. It is embodied in the vibrant, ongoing conversation she has ignited among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers worldwide. Every jade bead, every meticulous layer of cinnabar, every subtle architectural choice within Temple 13 tells us something deliberate, something profound. This woman mattered. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary part of her enigmatic story. Not what we know for certain, but the boundless wonder of what we still don't. The Red Queen teaches us that history is never just a static collection of facts. It is a living, breathing puzzle, a shared human longing to connect with and understand the past. In that profound sense, her legacy is still actively unfolding. She lies wrapped in red, the primal color of life and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth.
Her face, once hidden behind a radiant jade mask, now stares back at us through the lenses of science, the interpretive power of art, and the sheer force of human wonder. She remains nameless, but undeniably not voiceless. Mysterious, yet utterly unforgettable. The Red Queen may have ruled a tangible kingdom in life, but in death, she rules something far greater, our collective imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story was written in silence, and yet, somehow, she speaks volumes. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant, culturally rich district of Coyoacán, then a charming village nestled on the verdant outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the iconic Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a striking mosaic of color, stark contradictions, and a deep, quiet strength. It would later transform into a sacred sanctuary, a poignant battleground against pain and societal norms, and eventually a revered museum dedicated to one of the most iconic and groundbreaking artists of the 20th century. Frida, the third of 4 daughters, was born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer of considerable talent, and Matilde Calderón, a devout Catholic woman of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were a study in opposites. Guillermo, reserved, intellectually curious, and often melancholic. Matilde, deeply religious, fiercely traditional, and emotionally distant. Frida would inherit her father's introspective nature and keen artistic eye, coupled with her mother's fierce resilience and indomitable will. As a child, Frida was remarkably imaginative, outspoken, and possessed an innate boldness. She devoured books voraciously and fearlessly posed questions that most adults preferred to avoid. But at the tender age of 6, her life was irrevocably altered when she contracted polio, an illness that left her right leg noticeably thinner and weaker than the other. It was a physical difference she would diligently strive to mask with her signature long, flowing skirts. Yet it was a challenge she never allowed to diminish her vibrant spirit. The illness confined her to bed for agonizing months, isolating her from other children. During this period of convalescence, she forged an exceptionally close bond with her father, Guillermo, who lovingly encouraged her to engage in physical exercises, ride bicycles, and cultivate an unyielding mental sharpness. Unlike most girls of her era, Frida harbored no aspirations of becoming a conventional wife or homemaker. Her audacious goal was to become a doctor. At the precocious age of 15, she enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City, a remarkable feat as she was one of only a handful of girls accepted into its hallowed halls. There, she not only distinguished herself by her formidable intelligence, but also by her rebellious wit, radical political thinking, and an utterly unique, avant-garde sense of style. She quickly gravitated towards a group of bright young intellectuals known as Los Cachuchas, with whom she passionately debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was instinctively drawn to revolution, to radical ideas that dared to challenge entrenched traditions and societal norms. Even in those nascent years, long before the catastrophic bus crash that would shatter and redefine her body, and decades before the global fame that would cement her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already actively painting herself into the world. She did so with sharp, unyielding edges, unapologetic ideas, and an identity too vast and singular to ever conform to anyone else's expectations. She wasn't simply growing up in Coyoacán. She was meticulously preparing to entirely remake herself, to emerge as a powerful, autonomous artistic force. On a fateful afternoon, September 17th, 1925. Frida Kahlo's young life was brutally cleaved in two: the carefree girl she had been, and the resilient, pain-forged woman she was tragically forced to become. That day, she boarded a rickety wooden bus with her then-boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing each other, perhaps even passionately arguing, for Frida never did anything halfway. But mere moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in a horrifying instant, her entire future unraveled into a chaotic tableau of excruciating pain, twisted metal, and deafening silence. The crash was unspeakably horrific. The powerful streetcar crushed the wooden bus against a solid wall, splintering its timber frame and flinging passengers violently. Frida was tragically impaled by an iron handrail. It pierced her left hip and gruesomely exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column was fractured in 3 separate places. Her right leg was shattered in 11 places. Her foot was dislocated. Her collarbone and ribs were broken. Her shoulder was dislocated. Her abdomen was punctured. She was just 18 years old. A compassionate man, witnessing the carnage, covered her mangled form with a borrowed overcoat. Someone else, amidst the horror, noticed that her body was eerily sparkling, not from blood, but from the shimmering gold powder she had been carrying in a small pouch. It had exploded on impact, dusting her broken frame in what looked like glittering, macabre ash. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where she endured numerous agonizing surgeries over the following arduous months. She spent weeks, then months, encased in a stifling body cast, lying flat on her back, completely immobile, writhing with persistent infection, profound uncertainty, and unimaginable physical agony. The future she had so vividly imagined, of becoming a doctor, of healing others, slipped further and further away with each agonizing day. Yet, in that enforced stillness, a new vital impulse began to stir within her. Her father, recognizing her burgeoning creative spirit, gifted her a set of brushes and paints. Her resourceful mother ingeniously rigged a special easel to hang directly above her bed. A large mirror was positioned on the canopy, allowing her to see her own reflection. And there, confined within the plaster and steel, amidst the relentless agony, Frida began to paint. At first, it was born of sheer boredom, a desperate escape from her crushing reality. But then, it evolved into an all-consuming obsession. Her initial subjects were her own reflection, for she was all she had, her fractured body, her defiant gaze. But what emerged from those canvases wasn't vanity. It was raw, unadulterated survival. The crash had irrevocably broken her physically, yet it had simultaneously opened a profound door, a door into her own mind, her own battered body, and eventually into the surreal, brutally honest language of pain, identity, and resilience that would come to define her groundbreaking art. The young girl who had once dreamed of healing others now began the arduous, lifelong process of healing herself, one defiant brushstroke at a time. As Frida Kahlo lay encased in plaster and steel, her body engaged in a relentless, agonizing battle with itself. With every labored breath, she began to paint. What commenced as a desperate form of therapy soon blossomed into a singular, powerful language. A language that was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often unsettlingly difficult to confront, which was precisely its provocative intention. Frida did not indulge in painting pretty flowers or polite, picturesque landscapes. She painted pain. Her pain. a multifaceted agony that was physical, emotional, and profoundly existential. Her initial subjects were almost exclusively self-portraits, not out of any sense of vanity, but because, as she famously articulated, "I paint myself because I'm so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were modest in scale, painted on small tin or wooden panels, drawing deep inspiration from Mexican retablos, devotional paintings traditionally meant to recount stories of suffering and miraculous intervention. Frida brilliantly inverted this tradition, turning it inward. Her battered body became the canvas. Her raw emotions became the altar. She painted herself as split, as pierced, as perpetually bleeding. In one haunting painting, she depicts herself impaled by an array of nails, a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats disembodied in a barren, desolate landscape, eerily tethered to a broken classical column, a stark, potent metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, even decapitated and bare, yet never passively. Her gaze was always unflinching, always watching. Her pain was never sanitized or aestheticized. She painted the visceral ugliness of trauma with a paradoxical beauty and defiant spirit, and even a sardonic humor. Each piece was an act of profound reclamation, a reclaiming of her body, her harrowing experience, and her identity as a woman fiercely asserting herself in a world that constantly sought to define and confine her. But Frida wasn't merely recounting her own story. She was inventing an entirely new kind of visual narrative, one that masterfully blended the vibrant aesthetics of Mexican folk art, the dreamlike qualities of surrealism, the stark precision of medical illustration, and deeply personal symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her very soul, framed in an explosion of color, rich cultural heritage, and enduring myth. By the time she recovered sufficiently to walk again, albeit with persistent pain and difficulty, Frida was no longer the girl who had once dreamed of becoming a doctor. She had transformed into an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transmuted it, alchemically, into an inexhaustible source of creation. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She compelled the world to look at it, to truly see it, and in doing so, she elevated suffering into a sacred act of profound self-expression. In 1928, still grappling with her recovery, still painting with an insatiable drive, and just 21 years old, Frida Kahlo met the man who would ignite the most profound and turbulent relationship of her extraordinary life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior, already a colossal figure in the Mexican art world, revered as the nation's most celebrated painter. Massive in both physical stature and formidable presence, Rivera was a towering giant of Mexican muralism, renowned for his sweeping, politically charged frescoes that eloquently narrated the epic story of the Mexican people. Frida had encountered his monumental work before. She admired its power and scope. But now, emboldened by her own artistic awakening, she sought his direct opinion on her burgeoning portfolio. She brought her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, boldly interrupting his scaffolded work, and asked him bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego, pausing from his fresco, took one penetrating look at her canvases and replied with immediate conviction, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her something exceedingly rare, an unfiltered artistic voice, raw and unpretentious, brimming with a potent mix of rage, irony, searing pain, and undeniable beauty. Thus began a relationship that was as consuming as it was creatively fertile, a partnership defined by passion, drama, and mutual artistic ignition. Frida
with her characteristic candor, once famously quipped, "I suffered 2 terrible accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, an unlikely and often bewildering pairing to outsiders. Diego, massive, famously unfaithful, and a celebrated political figure. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already navigating the world with the aid of a cane, a constant reminder of her physical trauma.
Her parents, observing their union, famously dubbed it a marriage between an elephant and a dove, highlighting the stark physical and temperamental contrasts. Their bond was undeniably passionate, yet perpetually chaotic. Diego, despite his flaws, profoundly supported her art and tirelessly encouraged her growth as a painter, recognizing her genius. But he was also endlessly unfaithful, even engaging in a devastating affair with Frida's own beloved sister, Christina. Frida was utterly devastated by these betrayals, and in turn, she openly took lovers of her own, embracing both men and women, including rumored affairs with the exiled revolutionary Leon Trotsky and the pioneering American artist Georgia O'Keeffe. They eventually divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later in 1940, but this time on significantly different terms. In their second union, Frida firmly asserted her autonomy, insisting on keeping her own home, her own money, and her own name. Their second marriage was less about conventional romantic love and more about a deep creative partnership and a profound, if often painful, mutual understanding. Despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego remained a constant, powerful force in Frida's life. He challenged her, he wounded her, but crucially, he also believed in her, as an artist, as a revolutionary, and as a woman destined to redefine what painting could truly be. Together, their life was far from peaceful, but it was undeniably legendary. In the 1930s, Frida Kahlo followed Diego Rivera on an extensive journey northward, accompanying him to bustling San Francisco, industrial Detroit, and cosmopolitan New York, as he completed a series of high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad, particularly in the United States, thrust her face-to-face with the stark realities of American industrialism, its immense wealth juxtaposed against the searing contradictions of capitalism, and they left her with a profound, unshakable political discomfort. Frida was, at her core, a fiercely proud Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and a fervent admirer of indigenous traditions. The dazzling opulence she witnessed in the United States, especially while the Great Depression ravaged vast swaths of the country and plunged millions into poverty, only deepened her sense of disillusionment and alienation. In candid letters dispatched home, she wryly mocked the culture's relentless materialism and its superficial obsession with appearances. She yearned deeply for the grit, the vibrant color, and the inherent contradictions of her beloved Mexico. While Diego painted enormous propagandistic murals across the walls of factories and public buildings, Frida began to paint her own, smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works rendered on humble tin and intimate canvases. Her artistic style solidified during this period, becoming distinctly sharp, surreal, emotionally raw, and intimately psychological. It was during this intensely formative time that she produced some of her most iconic and powerful self-portraits. Frida didn't simply paint herself out of vanity, she painted herself to survive. Her very identity became her most enduring landscape. With her body in constant, excruciating pain from her devastating accident, enduring multiple surgeries, and grappling with the profound grief of a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned ever more inward. Her portraits from this era unflinchingly showed her bleeding, fragmented, and exposed. Yet, crucially, her face was always calm, her gaze always direct, utterly unapologetic. One of her most potent and heart-wrenching works, Henry Ford Hospital, depicts her lying on a desolate hospital bed, tears streaming, surrounded by a constellation of floating symbols of loss. A fetus representing her miscarriage, a snail symbolizing the agonizing slowness of time, medical equipment, and a cracked pelvis. It was a raw, graphic, and profoundly emotional canvas, a painting that quite literally bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself even more deeply in leftist politics. She and Diego famously welcomed Leon Trotsky, the exiled Russian revolutionary, into their Casa Azul home while he lived in exile. Frida purposefully wore Tehuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, not just as a fashion statement, but as a deliberate political and cultural declaration, a proud embrace of her Mexican heritage and anti-colonial stance. Her art was never disconnected from her deeply held beliefs. Her identity, her body, and her ideology were all inextricably intertwined in her powerful work. While Rivera painted grand murals of revolution, Frida painted its poignant human cost, the body in pieces, the mind on fire, and the self always staring unflinchingly back. In exile and in her persistent illness, she emerged not just as a painter of pain, but as a formidable painter of resistance. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer merely defined as Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into something else entirely, a formidable force, an artist whose work radiated with raw, unvarnished honesty, complex, surreal symbolism, and an unshakable cultural identity. Back in her beloved homeland, she stepped fully and unapologetically into her authentic self. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán evolved into a vibrant sanctuary of color and captivating contradiction. Its bright cobalt walls, accented with cheerful yellow trim, framed ancient Aztec statues in the lush garden, while monkeys and parrots wandered freely, adding to the surreal domestic tableau. The house became a living, breathing extension of Frida's boundless imagination, a masterful blend of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earthiness. Here, she meticulously surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, religious ex-votos, vibrant folk art, and revolutionary books, all speaking to her diverse passions. She donned bold, flowing Tehuana dresses, wove vibrant flowers into her elaborate braided hair, and painted amidst the intoxicating scent of copal incense and the joyful, melancholic sounds of mariachi music drifting in from the street outside. This period marked an explosion of extraordinary creativity for her. Her paintings grew more intricate, more layered with symbolism, and increasingly political. Works like The Two Fridas powerfully revealed the divided self. One Frida in European dress, her heart exposed and bleeding. The other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was Frida's raw visual autobiography, a poignant portrait of love, profound loss, and her deep, enduring heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her work in Paris, where celebrated artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style and unique vision. But even among the Surrealists, a movement that initially embraced her, Frida steadfastly stood apart. When André Breton, the movement's founder, attempted to definitively label her as one of their own, she firmly pushed back, famously stating, "They thought I was a surrealist.
but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. She painted Mexico, not the romanticized postcard version, but the living, breathing, complex country she adored. Her work pulsed with a rich tapestry of symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored the indigenous roots of her homeland, while simultaneously unmasking the violence of its colonial past and its challenging present. But even as her distinctive artistic voice grew stronger and more resonant, her physical health continued its relentless decline. Multiple agonizing surgeries, persistent infections, and chronic, debilitating pain became her daily reality. Still, she painted through it all. Propped up in bed, her torso bound tightly in restrictive corsets, her fingers defiantly clenched around her brush. Frida had returned to Mexico not to seek rest, but to reclaim her formidable power through paint, through politics, and through her fearless, unwavering embrace of the self. As the 1940s wore on, Frida Kahlo's body continued its agonizing betrayal. Her spine was inexorably deteriorating, and her right leg was perpetually plagued by painful infections. She endured more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often in grueling, relentless succession. At times, she was confined to her bed for months on end, encased in suffocating body casts or cruelly immobilized by traction devices that stretched her bones apart in an attempt to alleviate her torment. But still, she painted. Each canvas created during these increasingly difficult years became both a cathartic release and an unwavering act of resistance. Her works grew darker, more defiant, often infused with a clarity sharpened by unrelenting pain, as she resolutely refused to hide behind polite metaphor. In the iconic "The Broken Column," she presents herself graphically split down the middle, her body pierced with countless nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her shattered spine. Yet her face remains stoic, her gaze unflinching, a testament to her extraordinary resilience. For Frida, pain was no longer merely a subject, it was her constant companion, her formidable antagonist, her unyielding muse. Her political voice also grew louder and more insistent. She proudly joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, penned fiery letters condemning injustice, and vociferously called out imperialism. When her health no longer permitted her to walk, she defiantly appeared at protests in a wheelchair, holding signs high and shouting slogans with undiminished fervor. In 1953, Frida was finally granted her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue and triumphant celebration of her groundbreaking art. However, her health was so fragile that doctors strictly forbade her from attending. So, with characteristic audacity, she did what only Frida would do. She arrived at the gallery by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and ceremoniously placed directly in the center of the exhibition hall, still on her hospital bed. Dressed in her finest traditional attire, surrounded by her own powerful work, she greeted guests with sips of tequila, bursts of laughter, and that unquenchable fire still burning fiercely in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike in their simplicity and harrowing in their emotional depth. In "Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick," she painted herself wearing a restrictive steel corset, yet cradled by the comforting, powerful hands of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her very last known work was a poignant, vibrant still life of freshly sliced watermelons, a traditional Mexican symbol of life, death, and fertility. Even in her final days, facing the inevitable curtain call, Frida Kahlo remained an unyielding force, her spirit defiantly vibrant. Her last known artwork,
a poignant still life of freshly cut watermelons bore the handwritten inscription, Viva la vida, Coyoacán, 1954, Mexico. Long live life. This vibrant testament, brimming with the juicy, life-affirming symbolism of a traditional Mexican harvest, was not merely a painting. It was a final, audacious shout into the void, a testament to joy and political conviction, even as death drew near. These weren't just self-portraits or pretty pictures. They were radical manifestos, painted through unimaginable physical torment. Yet each stroke, each color, was signed with the indelible mark of life itself. On July 13th, 1954, at the tender age of 47, Frida Kahlo succumbed to her afflictions in the very room of La Casa Azul where she had entered the world. This iconic cobalt blue home in Coyoacán, a sanctuary of art and life, became her final resting place. While the official medical record cited a pulmonary embolism, those closest to her whispered of a deeper exhaustion, a spirit worn down not just by illness, but by relentless pain, by an agonizing succession of surgeries, by the lifelong brutal war waged against her own besieged body. Just a few days prior, propelled by an unshakable political fervor, she had insisted on attending a protest against the abhorrent CIA-orchestrated coup in Guatemala. Frail and confined to a wheelchair, her resolve was unshaken as she raised a clenched, defiant fist in the air. Right to her last breath, revolution beat strong in her heart, an unyielding rhythm against the injustice of the world. Her final diary entry, discovered after her passing, was brief yet searingly profound. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. It was a wish both for peace and for an end to a cycle of suffering, a poignant echo of a life lived intensely, often brutally, but always with an incandescent flame. Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most hallowed cultural institution. Her casket, draped dramatically in the scarlet banner of the Mexican Communist Party, was surrounded by a diverse assembly: grieving family, loyal friends, fellow artists, and impassioned revolutionaries. Among them, Diego Rivera, her tempestuous husband and artistic giant, was inconsolable, proclaiming her the greatest love of his life, a declaration laden with tragic irony, given the profound betrayals that had so often shattered her heart. Yet, in the quiet years that followed her death, an extraordinary metamorphosis began. Frida Kahlo, it seemed, refused to be forgotten. Initially, her name was murmured mostly within niche art circles. Her oeuvre defied easy classification, too overtly political and viscerally personal for the surrealists, yet too fantastical and unconventional for traditionalists. But slowly, inexorably, her piercing image, her compelling story, and her unyielding defiance began to reverberate far beyond Mexico's borders. By the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists vigorously unearthed and amplified forgotten female voices, Frida's distinct voice became a roaring chorus. She transcended the label of mere painter. She was reborn as a potent symbol of pain transmuted into breathtaking beauty, of feminism forged in the fires of resistance, of unapologetic Mexican identity celebrated in all its vibrant complexity, of fierce queerness, of disability bravely confronted, of revolution embodied, and of radical authenticity. Her arresting face, the iconic unibrow, the direct, unblinking gaze, the vibrant flowers crowning her hair, became universally recognizable. Her beloved La Casa Azul transformed into a bustling museum, Her private diaries became sacred texts for admirers, and her canvases, once deemed too personal, now command reverence in the world's most prestigious galleries. Frida Kahlo, who had lived so much of her life shadowed by Diego's monumental presence, stepped boldly into her own radiant light in death. She didn't merely leave behind paintings. She bequeathed a profound mirror, daring us all to gaze unflinchingly into its depths, not with pity, nor with fear, but with a searing, revolutionary fire. Today, Frida Kahlo's visage is omnipresent, adorning T-shirts, gracing colossal murals, reimagined as dolls, memes, posters, and powerful icons. Her signature unibrow, her florally adorned braids, her unflinching gaze, all are instantly recognizable, a global brand of selfhood. But the true power of her enduring legacy isn't simply her widespread recognition. It's the profound resonance of the truth reflected in her image. Frida never chased an illusion of flawlessness. She never contorted herself to fit conventional molds. She was gloriously unconventional, and she cared not for society's expectations. In a world clamoring for perfection, she gifted us unvarnished realness, raw, magnificently messy, bursting with vibrant life, tinged with anger, overflowing with joy, and steeped in glorious contradiction. She celebrated every facet of what made her different: her physical disability, her fluid sexuality, her unwavering political convictions, her rich cultural heritage. And she transmuted these deeply personal experiences into a universal art that effortlessly transcended borders and decades. She has evolved beyond being merely an artist. She is a global emblem of defiance, of empowered feminism, of profound cultural pride, and of an incandescent creative resistance. For queer communities, she stands as a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in an era that demanded silence and conformity. For women, she is an potent reminder that power isn't granted, it's claimed. For disabled artists, she offers irrefutable proof that pain can ignite the brush, not paralyze it. And for Mexico, she is a cherished daughter reclaimed, fierce and folkloric, forever woven into the very fabric of the national soul. Her masterpieces, once dismissed as idiosyncratic or overly personal, now rank among the most revered in the art world. Works like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column aren't merely viewed, they are felt profoundly by anyone who has ever endured suffering and yearned to transform that burden into something sacred, something redemptive. She existed in the margins, yet she courageously pulled them to center stage. She embraced paradox with open arms, a fervent communist who adorned herself in opulent gold, a woman profoundly betrayed, yet capable of loving again with fierce abandon, a body fragmented and ravaged, housing a soul utterly unbreakable. And through it all, she painted, not just with brilliant color, but with an unwavering revolutionary conviction. Frida Kahlo never set out to become a symbol. She simply, radically, told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she articulated the unspoken truths for millions of others who had never before seen their own complex, messy, beautiful realities reflected in art. Now, when we look into her eyes, we see more than just a face. We see indomitable courage. We see explosive color. We see enduring resistance. We see Frida, not gone, but gloriously immortal. Her canvas became a sanctuary, an unvarnished testament to the human condition, offering solace and profound recognition to countless individuals who, prior to her emergence, had rarely, if ever, witnessed their own intricate, often messy, yet inherently beautiful realities reflected within the hallowed, often exclusive, halls of art. Frida Kahlo shattered the illusion of a singular, idealized artistic narrative, replacing it with a kaleidoscopic truth that embraced the full spectrum of human experience. Now, when we gaze into the penetrating depths of her painted eyes, eyes that have witnessed both profound joy and unimaginable suffering, betrayal and triumph, we perceive far more than the mere contours of a face. We are met, instead, with the searing intensity of indomitable courage, a defiant spirit forged in the crucible of chronic physical agony, emotional turmoil, and societal expectation, yet one that was never truly broken. We see the riotous symphony of explosive color, each vibrant hue a passionate declaration of life, an echo of her Mexican heritage, and a visual language that transcended pain. This wasn't merely pigment applied to canvas. It was a visceral outpouring of her inner world, a refusal to let suffering dull the brilliance of her existence, or silence the powerful truths she had to tell. And woven through every deliberate brushstroke, every unapologetic self-portrait, is the unwavering thread of enduring resistance. Resistance against patriarchal norms, against colonial artistic influences, against the limitations imposed by her own body, and against any force that sought to diminish her fierce individuality. Hers was a silent yet thunderous revolution, an enduring act of self-possession captured in oil and tempera. Thus, Frida Kahlo transcends the confines of mere mortality. She is not merely an artist of the past, a historical figure confined to textbooks. Instead, she stands gloriously immortal, a perpetual beacon whose legacy continues to ignite imaginations, challenge perceptions, and affirm the boundless power of authentic self-expression across generations and cultures. Her unflinching gaze remains, forever inviting us to look deeper, to feel more acutely, and to find our own enduring reflections within the revolutionary art she left behind.